Ready, Cody?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, I'd like to call the Watermaster Board Special Board Meeting agenda, Monday, April 18th, 2022 at 2 p.m. Please order, and I'd like Director McCollum to do it. Begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And if you do roll call, please.
Director Dana?
Here.
Director May?
Here.
Director McCall?
Here.
And President Hack?
Here, and Susudu is absent.
Thank you.
Now I need item 1, approve the agenda. I need a motion and a second.
I so move. Second. Yes.
Director McCall?
Yes.
President Hack?
Yes.
And Director May?
Yes.
Public comment. This is an opportunity for members of the public to address the board on matters within the board's jurisdiction, which is not listed on the agenda. Please limit comments to 3 minutes or less. State law prohibits the board of directors from discussing or taking action on items not included on the agenda. Any public comments?
No public comment was received via email. Is there anybody online that has public comment at this time? None?
On to item 3, which will be workshop. Over to General Manager Paul Chuck.
This is actually a presentation that we run. President Huff, directors, staff, members of the public. So today, and I wanted to welcome in Steve Anderson here with our legal counsel, Best and Krieger. Between him and I, we're going to give a presentation. The subject today is minimal pumpers. You may have heard it called minimal producers, and we may even say minimum pumper or producer. But at the end of the day, we're talking about privately owned wells, primarily used for single-family residents, exercising their overlying rights to their water. We're going to be talking about a few boundaries, one being the High Desert Water District service boundary, and that boundary is basically where High Desert Water District may provide service through a meter. Another boundary is the adjudicated boundary, which was the legal boundary that was established in 1977 when the Warren Valley Basin was adjudicated. The other boundary that we may discuss is the actual Warren Valley Basin as it was described in Bulletin 118, which was California's official groundwater publication.
Ron, can you speak this more into your microphone? They're having a hard time hearing on the line.
Sure.
Thank you.
So the idea today, the format that I asked for this was a workshop so that we can sort of have a conversation. But the format basically is going to be that legal's going to give a PowerPoint presentation. At the end of that, we want an opportunity for questions, and then we would move into a segment where we can take recommendations and conversation moving forward. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Steve Anderson to begin the presentation.
Very much, Ron. Good afternoon, everybody. It's nice to be here. Thanks for having me. Are we going to be able to put the PowerPoint? Oh, there it is. Great. On the screen, just so that the folks outside of the room here will be able to follow. So, hi, I'm Steve Anderson, General Counsel to your Watermaster. I'm here today to talk, as Ron just shared, some information, background nature about the judgment, about water rights in the valley, and then we're going to hone in on minimal producers. And just to set the stage a little bit, I'm sure I'm telling you stuff you already know, but over the years since the judgment was issued back in 1977, we haven't always tracked real closely folks who put wells in to serve their families or next door. And it's starting to become a little bit of an issue because more and more folks are moving up here and gotta make sure everybody's following the law and being legally compliant. So our goal today is to set forward some background information, but also to seek recommendations for the board about how we might herd these cats back into a place of compliance with your charge and your direction. So that's where we're headed today. And so go ahead to the next slide. Is that you, Ron? Okay, thanks very much. So what we're going to go over today are information again that I'm sure all the board members and the staff know, which is your water sources, what the judgment is all about, who exactly is this Watermaster that we see before us and what is their role in the world, who exactly is a minimal producer and what does that terminology mean in judgment. What does it mean to participate in the judgment, whether it's groundwater management or being a pumper, and what does this concept of intervention mean? And we'll talk about that. We'll talk a little bit more about monitoring water extractions and the fact that we do have these minimal producers around the valley, but I don't know if any of them, or no more than a handful, have meters. And so the way the judgment works is they're not supposed to be producing more than 1 acre foot a year, which is about 329,000 gallons, but it's hard to tell if they're actually doing that if they don't have a meter. You know, we can take our best guess based upon an aerial and what kind of stuff they're growing, but, you know, trying to keep track of that, there's got to be some other way to monitor that. And then we have a series of recommendations that staff and legal counsel working together have come up with, but we'll be seeking direction on 5 or 6 items for you at the end of the meeting. So, particularly for those who are out there on the phone or on Zoom, High Desert Water District primarily gets its water from 2 different places. From the ground, and that's the native groundwater that's in the ground from precipitation, which isn't that much, but there is some. And then the second place your water comes from is from the State Water Project, right? From that delivery through the California Aqueduct, down the pipeline here from Mojave Water Agency, and then delivered to the agencies that are out here. And most of that water, or all that water, is recharged into the ground and then pumped out. But it's important in terms of what are we talking about here to have those 2 different, what I would call buckets of water in your mind, right? So there's a small percentage of it that's the native groundwater, that's a small bucket of water, and then your big bucket of water is that State Water Project water that's delivered here all the way from the Sacramento Delta, 400 plus miles to get all the way here. And what the judgment is focused on is both of those, but what it's really focused on in the first instance is the first smaller bucket. And who is it that has the right to pump the native groundwater out of the ground? In terms of the geography, the basin covers about 27 square miles. Go ahead, Ronnie, go to the next one. And according to the judgment as issued in 1977, there's only about 200 acre feet of water that now naturally recharges into the groundwater basin every year. There was a little twist on that in the 90s where there was a court ruling that maybe it was as much as 900 acre feet, but either way, 200 or 900, that's not a whole lot of water. Certainly not enough to serve all the needs of this valley. It's nowhere close. Yes, sir, Director State.
As I recall, USGS did a follow-up study, and they determined about 80, I think they said 81 acres. Now estimate that their new lysimeter as being the natural recharge. Although the 200 is the official legal amount, but USGS says it's actually closer to 80.
That could very well be accurate. I think that's right. And frankly, there are provisions under the judgment where if this board, we're not recommending that today, but if you ever wanted to revisit the sustainable yield and have the judge reconsider that, that's certainly something that's available to you to do. Not sure it's going to actually resolve many of the issues out here, whether it's 200 or 80, but we could certainly do that. Again, most of the water that comes into the valley is delivered through Mojave Water Agency through the State Water Project, and it's recharged in a couple of different basins. I believe they're mostly out by the airport. And And that water that you put in the ground, and most of the water used around here is for municipal and domestic purposes. So what we have on the screen now, just real quickly, is a map, and you can see in the light blue line, that's California Aqueduct coming in, and then you've got the sort of dashed blue, light blue, dark blue, that's the pipelines from Mojave Water Agency, and the one that's on the bottom part of the screen, hooking towards the bottom right, is delivering water to Yucca Valley and to Joshua Basin as well. Go ahead, Ron. So this is a close-up of that same map, just showing where your recharge sites are here, both a little bit to the north as well as in Joshua Basin and Yucca Valley. Go ahead, please. Just to give some context, particularly for those who are on the phone, about, well, how much water do we actually use out here in the valley? Well, the major producers in the valley, just last year, according to the annual report that you recently approved this board, your two major producers, High Desert Water District and the Golf Course, produce about 2,500 acre feet a year. 2,800 acre feet a year is delivered to you, less a little bit of loss from the State Water Project, or at least it was last year. And then one critical feat is that the water that comes from the Delta is not free, as you all well know. And at this point in time, the current charge is about $662 an acre foot, which is the delivery charge. And I don't know if it's top of what water put in the ground, Ron, or if that's the total charge put in the ground as well. It doesn't say delivery recharge, but
I think we have operations for maintenance on the line.
okay, so that's about the right number. And then, of course, no price ever goes down here in California, so that incrementally increases over time. Next slide. Turning to the judgment, there have obviously been inhabitants of this area for many, many centuries and decades, and during the mid-1900s, there were wells that were pumping in this valley. It became clear to anyone who was paying attention that the water levels were dropping. It was becoming much more difficult to produce water. And so that led in the 1970s to a decision by locals to start negotiating about water rights and who has the right to pump the native groundwater in the basin, which again is somewhere between 80 and 200 acre feet or so. And how are we going to divvy that up? And so a negotiated process took place, and in order to make that legal, the parties entered into what's called a contract or stipulated judgment and presented that judgment along with the background scientific information to the San Bernardino Superior Court, who back in 1977 adjudicated the water rights, meaning that the judge allocated water to particular individuals and companies in this water district at that time in particular amounts. And so that becomes the legal framework for determining who owns the rights to pump native groundwater every year in this valley. I'm going to turn this over to Ron because there's some different boundaries he was talking about a little bit before.
So these are the boundaries that I mentioned earlier on. The red boundary would be HDWD service boundary here in the local area. I don't show the entire boundary of the northern half up in the Mesa area. The black line is the adjudicated boundary, which it's important to me that you know how far, at least east, that extends beyond the actual Bulletin 118 Warren Valley Basin, which is depicted here in the yellowish color. We are going to talk about that boundary a little bit later as it relates to the Joshua Basin boundary.
And from a legal perspective, again, for those of you on the phone, what the court adjudicated was the water rights inside the blue or black boundary. I can't quite tell what color it is. That black line. So even though that black line doesn't correspond with the hydrogeologic boundary that the Department of Water Resources says exists under the ground, which is the yellow, that's what we have here. We have a court that has decided the water rights within the black boundary. If you're outside that black boundary, have other things to comply with in terms of SGMA and the groundwater sustainability agencies and all that stuff, but you don't have to comply with the adjudication per se. That makes sense. In terms of, so what's written down in the judgment and what are all the different water rights that are out there? Well, interestingly, it really didn't adjudicate water rights for a whole bunch of people. There was a very limited number of folks who got water rights in it. And so, most importantly, what the judgment says was, and what the judge determined, and this is the law, because the judge signed, is that anyone who is within that black boundary, that didn't step up and ask for their water rights that had been previously pumped to be recognized, their water rights were prescripted, meaning they don't belong to them anymore. They belong to the pumpers and those people that signed on to the judgment and the judge affirmed. And so everybody out there except about 18 parties listed in the judgment, as it's coalesced over time, those are the 18 folks that have the right under the judgment to pump water. And basically that amounts to High Desert Water District, used to be the Yucca Water Company as well, but you folks acquired them a number of years ago, and the golf course, as well as 16 named individual pumpers in the valley that we'll call the judgment minimal producers. And these are folks that are allowed to pump no more than 1 acre foot, which again is about 329,000 gallons or so a year, which is enough for a couple of households. Yes, sir, Mr. Pershing.
Plus the 10-acre feet for the Joshua Tree Retreat Center.
Right, we can talk, I'll get to that, you're absolutely right. They have an interesting conundrum there, but, ostensibly in the basin, we have the 16 named pumpers who can pump no more than 1 acre foot, and we've got the names, we've got their APN numbers as of 1996. We have, but whoever owns those properties today, whether it's the name, whether they've owned it for the last 30 years or not, those water rights stick with those parcels for those 16. And then the remaining water rights have been established in the name of High Desert Water District and the Hawk Landing, and that is it. Yes, sir. One more question.
So if a property was party to the original adjudication, one of the 16 parcels, and had a right to have a well and a 1 acre foot maximum out, and if they had a well at one time, that's how they got in as the 16. But now there's some new owner there. It sounds like the new owner would be grandfathered in, that the water right goes with the property and not with the owner. What if their well fails? Can they put in a new well on their property because they have that adjudicated right? Or if the well goes away, does their right go away?
The right stays, even if they're not pumping it, their 1 acre foot is attached to their property. And I will say that even though it's 16 named pumpers, I believe Ron, it's 32 parcels, because some of those folks own multiple parcels. So there's 32 parcels associated with that up to 16 acre foot of water. But if their well collapsed and it didn't re-drill, that doesn't change the fact that that 1 acre foot maximum still attaches to those parcels, whether they use it or not.
Can water be provided from one parcel to another with the same owner?
Well, under the way your judgment works, only if those parcels are listed. So if that owner owns a parcel and they have 3 or 4 adjacent parcels and those adjacent parcels are listed in the judgment, then yes, one well could serve those 3 or 4 contiguous parcels. But if they bought a 5th that was never named in the judgment, then the answer is no, from a purely legal standpoint. Now, of course, we're here to talk about practicalities, but from a purely legal standpoint, no, you can't buy another parcel, next door or even down the street and then ship your part of your 1 acre foot down there. That's not allowed. Under strictly speaking, under the judgment. Yes, sir.
So, to go back over that, we only have 16 named pumpers, but those 16 named pumpers own multiple lots. 32. Therefore, each one of those lots gets to have their own well, or the area gets to have its own well. I'm a little lost.
So, a minimal producer was defined at the time of the judgment as that owner. There's a line item that says, I'm sorry, I don't remember her last name, Angela Bavarian. So she's on the top of the list. Whether she owns 1 parcel or 3 contiguous parcels, she's still only allowed to pump 1 acre foot total for all 3 of those parcels. Does that make sense? So she doesn't get to get 1 acre foot each, it's 1 acre foot for all 3.
Okay.
And one well.
And one well.
And Ron, I don't know when it is, but very, very closely now, we have coming up in the next few slides a depiction on a map of where those 16 parcels are. Does
next couple of slides.
Yes, and I would like to include one other caveat with the 16. So out of those 16, 3 of those were couples. It was a man and a wife, a man and a woman. So, each of them get 1 acre foot or not. Again, the purpose of this workshop is because there is such ambiguity related to this, the idea is to sort through some of it and come to conclusions on how we want to administer it moving forward, manage it moving forward. So the whole reason we were asked to be here was because of these questions. So I appreciate you recognizing how unclear that some of these things are.
Thank you. And the way this judgment works, not like all judgments, but like many judgments, is the folks, these 16 owners, and the golf course as well, maintain what are called overlying rights under the way water rights works in California, which means they have the right to pump the water and then use it on the land where their wells are and what that are listed in the judgment. They don't have the right to pump that water and send it 5 miles down the street. They have to use it on that ground. The different category of rights are those that belong to high desert water district, because you're considered under California law to be an appropriator. And what that means is you're a public agency or somebody that pumps water and then distributes it to your customers all over town. You're allowed to do that because you're in this separate category called appropriators. Now, one other category that's out there, and this is a different thing in this judgment, is the Institute for Mental Physics. Is that their name now? Joshua Tree Center? Is that they are right outside the basin in what they call in the judgment a zone of transmission. So if you can imagine, there's a hydrogeologic boundary on the east side where some of the water, at least formerly, maybe today, heads east if it goes over this physical barrier. And so when the judgment was issued, folks recognized they were right there near that barrier. And so the judgment says that for purposes of the judgment, the retreat center is considered a minimal producer, and that they pump from what's called the zone, the transmission zone or zone of transmissivity between this basin and Joshua Basin. And under the judgment, they were given the right to pump up to 80 acre feet of water, but it's really not out of our basin, it's out of the Joshua Basin, or that area in between the 2 basins. And so what I understand from Ron is even though they can pump up to 80, which I'm not sure they can pump nearly that much, it really doesn't have any impact on how much water these waters in the basin. Is that right, Ron?
That's the way I understand it.
Is it 80? I thought it was 10.
It says 80 in the amended judgment that I was reading today. So we can clarify that, but I believe it's 80.
Regardless, they're still sort of on their side of the other barrier.
Yeah, I kind of think of it like a waterfall. We're not going to get it back, and it's not their fault that we're losing it through the waterfall.
Right.
So it's the impact to our basin is not impacted.
So the 80 or 10 isn't really important and germane to us, it's just, it needs, like, whichever it is.
Right.
That's with 80, because 10 isn't quite enough.
Right.
What, next slide? Is that where we have now?
I want to ask a question during the community.
Are you kind of finished with this? I think we should have.
Hold the question until he asks, I think is what he's saying.
Here's what mine, thanks.
Thank you. So I think here in the next couple of slides, we'll have that map I was talking about. We're not quite there yet. So then the next thing is, what is this Watermaster? You're the Watermaster board. The reason the Watermaster board meets separately and is a distinct legal entity from High Desert Water District, even though you have the same board members, is that the Watermaster is an arm of the court. You are part of the judicial branch of government when you sit here today. You are the people that on behalf of the judge in San Bernardino County administers this judgment on a day-to-day basis. And High Desert Water District, as you know, is part of the executive branch of government. That's why you have to have 2 different boards here. And so your job is to implement the judgment, make sure it works, make sure you do the basin management plan. You've obviously done all this work back in the 80s and 90s where you helped build the pipeline, get that thing built with High Desert, and did all these things. But your job is also to make sure that we've got all the cats herding in the same direction as we go along here. And so to the extent anyone wants to pump more water or monitor or put water in the ground or setting up rules if they're needed for transfer or sales of water. All those things are items that this board regulates. And again, one of the primary reasons we're here today is that as we have more and more wells pop up over the valley, because they go get well drilling permits from the county who issues those, not all of those folks really understand that there's a judgment or have brought themselves within the umbrella of the judgment and this board. And I think the big picture is that you can get away with that for so long while you only have a few people doing that, but when the numbers start to grow, and what Ron and your staff has figured out here is we need to have an effort to bring all these people into the judgment and make them understand their roles, responsibilities, and duties, and limitations that are part of that judgment. The other thing that you, of course, have the ability to do is impose replenishment assessments, because the big picture here is, and I think we said this before, is that there's 18 original parties in the judgment. Those 18, part of the pumping they do is the native groundwater, right? Part of that water is pumped. But everybody else in the valley, and most of the pumping done even by your district, is state water project water that's been recharged, right? You are not pumping native groundwater. The only people that are really pumping native groundwater, frankly, are Hawks Landing and these 16 mineral producers. Everybody else is producing state water project waters, and because it costs money to put that in the ground, frankly, those people should be paying for it. They should be paying their proportionate share of what they're pumping out of the ground.
What is the maximum that the court allowed for the golf course to extract? I know they've never done the whole amount, it's like 585 acre feet.
Correct. 585.
585. So they can have 585 acre feet, the other 16 can have 16, 10 out of 81 or 200.
Right. 100%.
One click.
Right, yeah, that's right, that's right. And that's why it's such conflict. Yes, sir.
Talk about, I'm gonna bring this up, the golf course does have a minimal fee. $15 an acre foot. The thing that's interesting to me, which I don't think a lot of people in the community know, that still is being put in. This is like one big basin, we all have our straws in it. They're not actually bringing out native groundwater, they're bringing out state water products. And they're paying $15 an acre foot, and the rest of the community is paying 60. So what would be thought process I know I'm jumping ahead, perhaps. What's the thought process? If we have minimal producers pay, are they gonna pay this little paltry $15 an acre foot that the golf course pays, which is, I know, it's education? They're gonna pay the $662, which I think everybody should be paying, that kind of subsidizing the golf course.
Correct. So,
At the time of the adjudication in the 70s, USGS had their best professional estimate as to natural recharge between 800 and 2,000 acre feet a year. They thought they were being conservative by picking 900 as the number that they used for natural recharge. And then it was 20 years later that USGS came back with the new numbers.
So one of the pieces of background that we didn't share, but I'm happy to share with it now, is back in the mid-90s, when you were building the pipeline, bringing state water in here, there was an effort to do the math a little bit differently, to say, you know what, the golf course should really be paying a little bit more than this $15. And so your Watermaster board went through the effort of saying, well, really, we should share that 200 acre feet. And so the golf course should, up to 200 acre feet, get 75% of that or whatever, but for any increment of water they pump over, let's say, 150 acre feet, they should be paying that higher rate. Well, that went to court. That went all the way to the Court of Appeal in the case of what was then called the Blue Skies Country Club versus the Water District, and the golf course won. The golf course won that case. And so the judge determined that, no, everyone signed on the dotted line, like it or not, giving them 585 acre feet. Doesn't matter if you didn't understand what you were signing at the time. That's what everybody agreed to based upon then current circumstances, and you can't change the rules of the road now, years later. And so that's why they only pay the $15. There's I believe you call it an administrative assessment, and then the replenishment assessment is paid by others, including High Desert Water District as an example. And that's why there's a break in that paying, because the golf course took its court.
So, with the new, if, I'm probably way ahead, I'll get the answer later on, but if we had people, what fee would they be charged, or is that something for discussion?
That's a consideration for discussion right now. We have a couple ideas, but, it's all just for brainstorming.
Okay. So, we'll jump ahead just a little bit on that, to give you a flavor of it. It's up to your board to give us some recommendations, but I think our thoughts are, those original 16, they should be paying the same as the golf course, because they were here at the time, they're listed in the judgment, they should be paying the $15. Anyone not those original 16 needs to be paying the higher rate, because you're bringing water, putting it in the ground, and they're pumping it back up, and if you don't charge them for it, then your ratepayers are paying for it. Everybody else is paying for it, so you'll see our recommendations later on that, but that's where we're heading, and there's obviously room to maneuver within.
Who will, by residents, businesses that are not the original 16, in the adjudicated basin, is that legal? Was it adjudicated basin?
So that's another, topic that we're gonna get to. It's even mentioned here on this slide. In 2002, Watermaster adopted a policy allowing for new wells under certain conditions. And we're gonna keep there also.
Repeat from.
No, that was a different condition that was put into place, only a few years ago, yes.
We'll get to it.
Yeah, we'll get there. So again, we've kind of gone over this already, but just to hit the highlights again. So these mineral producers technically are just the 16 named in the judgment. But around here, I think you used the word mineral producers as nomenclature for anybody who's pumping less than 1 acre foot, any private wells out there. So that's just kind of the words we use around here. So there's the original 16 mineral producers that I'm going to suggest to you are kind of exempt. And then there's the other minimal producers, these new ones that have come about over time that have drilled wells that are pumping because your Watermaster board adopted a policy back in the 90s that allows them to do that. And that policy, frankly, we'll get to this, has not been rigorously enforced, and because you've got a lot more wells going on the ground now, it's probably time to rope all those people into following what your rules are. Sorry, I need to go back just, and one of the things we're going to talk about in a minute is that apart from the original 16, everybody else who wants to take advantage of your policy that allows them to produce water, they need to both pay the money, but they also need to intervene in the judgment so we can keep track of them. So you know their name, the judge knows their name, we know they're out there, we know they're producing out of a well. And what Ron will tell you, I think, is we don't have a good handle on that. I mean, we know where some of them are, but we don't have a comprehensive list of who are these people that have gotten well permits over the years, how many of them are actually drilled, how many of them have wells that are still operating. And so when we get to the end of this presentation, one of the recommendations that we're going to ask for is direction from you to keep investigating along those lines. It's hard to figure out.
Is metering and reporting on some kind of annual basis part of that program?
Part of the 2002 rule that allowed for new wells to be.
It does require metering.
It requires a meter at that point and a replenishment fee.
It seems like Watermaster can't change some of these things with blue skies. How did the board then make the decision in 2002 to allow more wells to become part of this? That's what it seemed to me that had gone to.
Went to the court. It was approved by the court at the time. Any rule changes is brought to the court by legal.
And just to answer that a little more fully, the reason you could do that was because what you're really doing is selling the state water. Right? So you as a water master board can do that with high desert water districts, concurrence, which of course is the same board, because what you're doing then is selling state water to these new minimal producers. The native water is spoken for in the judgment, but you're allowed to do what you want with that native water as the High Desert Water District Board. If you want to adopt a policy through the Watermaster or the High Desert Water District Board to sell that water, make it available to others, you're allowed to do that. And that's what this board did.
So the board allowed that to happen, but didn't at the same time create any collection system for the money from the State Water Project for that. So they're getting the water from the State Water Project for free, is that right?
So think of this as a transaction. We're selling on the State Water Project. One of the conditions to intervene was they have to meter and they have to pay a replenishment fee for 1 acre foot. The current fee being $662 per foot. So those property owners that intervene according to the rule established in 2002 are subject to a meter and to the replenishment fee. By the way, there's currently 2 of those that are active.
This right, wells, we'll just say the last 10 years, some wells have gone in, have not intervened, have not been metered, have not da-da-da-da-da. So one part of the solution might be forward. I mean, looking back, that's the difficulty. Moving forward, it would be really easy to say, yes, you could drill a well if you do A, B, and C. Pay for the water, et cetera. Does that make sense? That shouldn't be a problem, right, going forward.
It shouldn't be a problem. However, and we're going to get there again. Part of the problem is that there isn't always a relationship between High Desert Water District or the Watermaster and San Bernardino County. I happen to have established a connection or a person down there, but they change hands like crazy. So we currently are benefiting from being on a month or a weekly subscription to see permits being issued, and I currently have a couple of people on the staff that check in with me personally to verify whether or not these properties are subject to the Watermaster or not. So previous to that, different staff, different people had different sources and managed that in a different way. So as long as we maintain contact, which has been recommended that we actually enter into some kind of agreement with San Bernardino County that puts them on the hook and preserves that relationship moving forward. As people come and go, the relationship comes and goes. So that's what's happened. There's been a whole lot of holes in the process, and there's been a whole lot of rogue activity that we haven't been able to keep track of. And again, the nature of this whole workshop is to make sure everyone's aware of those. And I have no thought that we can sort all this out today, but at least we can discuss it and then maybe schedule future workshops that we can bring back, specific solutions.
Is Watermaster to protect the basin. The Watermaster, there's no requirement, I guess, or some process where the Watermaster is made aware that somebody is going to drill a well, saying they just go to San Bernardino, get a permit. I guess the judge has said, okay, you guys need to be in charge of this, you're the Watermaster. The San Bernardino County is looking at it like, oh, well, just give them a permit, we don't need to call anybody. I mean,
That's how it's occurred, and other than us stepping in and asking for them to check in with us, there's been no legal direction to the county that they must.
So that's how we got where we're at.
That's how we got where we're at.
Okay, so
bear with us.
So one of the tasks will be, how do we correct that loophole, if you will, or whatever you want to call it, just something gets able to maybe
is for over 100 years, counties issue the right to drill a well, not to pump the well, not to turn it on, but to be able to drill a hole in the ground has always been in the county's sphere, even when this judgment was issued. And probably because it's considered a land use kind of thing, right? Like building a house, drilling a well is part of building a house. And so,
after the town incorporates all of the, so many of the other county functions that used to be county functions, are county functions in unincorporated areas, now go to town.
except
For well drilling, it stays with the county.
almost all, I can't think of a city to bring it up, maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think those have always stayed in the county.
Yeah, if I may.
Well,
Just one point of clarification, Steve. So we're talking about these additional wells that have come on, but there are some that are historic that during the adjudication weren't recognized at that time, so I just want to bring that to your attention. Actually goes to the adjudication.
so we're gonna give you some maps on that too. I know this is confusing, but we have, as of 77, we have these 16 mineral producers. But we have some suspicion, there are probably other folks who were pumping at that time, they didn't bother wanting to come down to the town hall and talk to people about it. And so one of the things we're gonna ask direction from you at the end of this meeting is, what if somebody comes forward today and says, you know what, I have proof that I was pumping in 1975. And I can prove to you all that I was there first, even though my predecessor or my grandpa didn't go down to the town hall and get involved in all these negotiations. I was there too in 1975. What should we do about those folks? Should they be in their own category? That's one of the things we're gonna get to. Exactly what Paul's talking about.
That's a pretty small sliver.
Hopefully.
Oh.
Can I ask one question? And then we'll move on.
Well, you're the president.
I think I'm kind of a little bit perplexed from a perspective of somebody buys these properties, and now all of a sudden they are saying, well, I didn't know that I was part of this adjudication. I find that really kind of difficult to swallow a little bit because somebody buying these properties didn't do their due diligence, and I can go into a long story of purchasing some property in Arizona on the Colorado River. I didn't purchase a thing. I wasn't part of it. The people purchased some land in Arizona on the Colorado River, and they went ahead and did this, and then they found out that, oh, you can't, there's no water to it, it's on BLM land, you can't get access to it, and I was kind of looking at that, and I backed out, and it seems to me that the responsibility rests on the purchaser of the property to find these things out, and so I had difficulty trying to find a heart for these people that have gone ahead and just done what they wanted to do. I buy something, you have to find out what's going on, and it's your responsibility to do that. Go ahead, Rob, and then we need to move on.
Supervisor Don Rao is a Valley resident, and it's very apparent at the county level that water abuse, illegal use of water for cannabis, illegal cannabis grows throughout the county is a huge problem. Not quite so much right here, but probably some. But golly, some of the areas of the county are just being overwhelmed. And the county has put together a task force, they have enforcement going on. I can't fathom that we couldn't approach Don, Supervisor Rao, to get us hooked up properly and ongoing basis to figure out where the permitted wells within our service area and the adjudicated basin are, whether new ones going forward or existing ones that have gone in over the last 20 or 30 years. So getting that on the list and getting somebody there at the county to help us get a handle on APNs and contact information so that then whatever decision we make
Correct. Absolutely.
Okay, go ahead, please.
Okay, so we talked about this, these are the minimal producers, so again, there's two sets of minimal producers, the originals and then the newbies, but we still use the same word, just to confuse you.
Original.
Next slide. Again, those 16 named original producers cannot produce more than 1 acre foot a year. Not required to pay the replenishment assessment because they were here first, just like the golf course, and they're named and they've got their 32 parcels listed there. But one thing we haven't really closely enforced is, as we talked about before, they're only supposed to be serving those 32 parcels or whatever, 1 or 2 or 3 they own. They can't give water to the neighbor out of their well. That's not proper use, that's not allowed under the judgment. Doesn't mean it's not happening, but it's something that I think Ron and his folks want to look at more closely, and that'll be one of the recommendations. We want to eyeball that a little bit. Obviously, these are private property owners. It's hard to do. You don't want to violate the law and go on their property where you're not allowed, but on the other hand, we can't just let this go willy-nilly either. We've got to figure out a way to look at this a little bit more closely.
Currently, those are of a suspicious nature, not confirmed, so.
Yeah, correct. And then the next slide, I think we have some of these maps. Okay. Even though they're hard to see, Ron can tell you what's happening.
So this map is showing the original minimal producers, and they're in tan, and, can I zoom in on this, Cody? So you can see there's, the originals are tan, and there are 2 that are blue. So out of the original 16, back in 2000, we performed completed a survey of the original 32 properties, and out of those, we're only aware of 2 that are still active of the original listed in the judgment properties.
What you mean by that, Ron, is only 2 of those 32 parcels are producing water and service.
To our knowledge, according to the survey in 2002, and our common knowledge of the practices going on out there. So the interesting thing is, out of all the 16 original, the 32 properties, they were all in what is currently the High Desert Water District service boundary. So most of those are have access to community water, to our High Desert Water District's water.
So they may have abandoned.
Have services, yeah. Or they may even still be vacant. They're not all developed.
Gotcha. So, again, turning to what we probably already talked about a little bit here, so there's a lot more than, even though we only have 2 of the original 16 apparently pumping water, there's a lot more than 16 pumping now. At least there's a lot more than 2. And over the last number of years, as we've advertised this a little bit more, some of the people who are drilling wells in the last 3, 4, 5 years, some of them, because the county has alerted them through Ron, have come forward and done what they're supposed to do, which is intervene in the judgment and pay. There's some of them that are doing that. There are others who are not doing that. And then there are those who drilled sometime between the 70s, 80s, and late 70s through today that may or may not be doing that, and probably aren't, right? Because we only have a few checks that come in every year of those people that are paying their fair share of state water project water. And so this slide is all about the fact that it's not really fair dealing to have some people complying with the law, especially these new folks, right? They had to go out and hire a lawyer, intervene in the judgment, and then, I wouldn't say it cost them $1 million, but they still have to spend a little bit of money to go through all that hassle. And one of the things that they've said to me, and they've said to Ron, through their lawyers to me, is, hey, Steve, we appreciate there's this judgment and we want to follow the law, but it's not fair of you guys to make us follow the law and there's other folks who aren't, right? Everybody should be following the law, not just the 3 or 4 of us who voluntarily stood up and raised our hands, and it's not fair. And fair enough. I mean, I guess our view of it is that's a fair statement. You know, everybody should be complying with the rules and not just those that are kind enough to stand up. And as we've shared before, unless they're named in the original judgment and they're listed as one of those 16, they really don't have a right to pump native groundwater. The only right they have is under the policy of this board. They can pump their well as long as they pay, their proportionate share or their full 1 acre foot, $660, and they intervene in the judgment so we can keep track of them. And if they drilled their well later in time, they should be on a meter so we know exactly how much they're pumping. But there's a lot of folks out there who aren't following the laws. And so, again, we're here today to give you some practical potential solutions and seeking direction from you on that. So, again, Ron shared with you that after 2002, when you first adopted this policy, which is Policy 0102, and if you ever look at your Watermaster rules, it's at the very end, it's the last page of your rules in the board packet, and you said, yes, you folks after 2002, you can intervene in judgment, you can put a well in the ground and pump it as long as you follow these rules.
Under the conditions of those rules, which were, as long as you're within the Warren Valley adjudicated basin and outside HTWE service boundary, and you're subject to metering and paying a replenishment fee.
That's one of the twists we're going to talk about you today. The original policy, again, back in 02, which is still in place, was your board, your Watermaster board only allowed it for people that are outside of the high desert boundary, right? So on the fringes here, not people who are within your boundary. And so that presented a little bit of a conundrum here that your board addressed here a couple of years ago, right? Right before Ed left, he brought you a slight twist on that policy to think about that's now in place, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But for the most part, your board back in 2002 did not want folks within your boundary drilling wells. They wanted you wanted them to hook up to high desert. You're the public water service provider, they should do that.
Available service, that number sticks in my mind that it.
So we adopted Rule 10D of the rules and regs, which, so it didn't amend Rule Policy 0102 to allow new wells to be drilled in HDD service boundary, but it provided a provision for any such wells that were drilled, that once water became available, they would be required, once high desert water district water became available, that they would be required to connect to that water and stop pumping and destroy the well. Well, as Steve can confirm, as the Watermaster, we don't have the authority to cause them to destroy a well. We have the authority to allow them to pump or not. So what happened when we brought forward that provision was that there was a property owner that wanted to drill a well, and they were in conversation with me, and they told me that we were violating their human rights, not allowing them to have water service. And I let them know at the time, well, look, I'm not the authority, the Watermaster is the authority, the public board. You can write a letter to them and ask them. It's not my authority. I'm just administering the rule as it exists. So what happened, they wrote a letter and addressed it to the secretary of the Watermaster, the general manager. And he brought that to the Watermaster, and the Watermaster agreed to not oppose that property to intervene. That's what happened. And at that same meeting, he got the provision adopted, Rule 10D, that any such well that was drilled after a certain date would be required to stop producing and abandon well if water service became available. That's where the 660 feet was referenced. So currently, High Desert Water District service rules allows for a property to have a service as long as it's within 660 feet of an existing water line. So the idea was, in this case, the properties were not eligible for water service. Watermaster chose not to oppose. They intervened. Isn't consistent with the actual rules. They still haven't drilled or developed that well. happen in that case. Does that make sense? And it's a little bit confusing, but
Right, you legally have the right to grant an exception to your own rules, because it's your rule, right? So you can grant an exception to it as board, so in that instance, you granted an exception for that one guy. I don't know if on the map, Ron, is it one of those two red dots on the map?
So this map is, trying to depict property owners that have been following the rule for 01 and 2002 that allow new wells to, intervene. So the gold ones are the two that have intervened and they're actually active. You can see them far out there on the west. And then the rose-colored ones are the ones that have intervened, but they still haven't developed or drilled a well yet.
Just in case people can't, I can barely see it, but, yeah, way over there on the left, like the lower left corner, are the two gold ones kind of in the hills there, and then the two red ones are on the middle on the south end there. You can see the two red. They haven't drilled yet, but the two gold ones have drilled.
The ones that one's on the southern boundary, about the middle.
Is that where my cursor is there, Scott? Director?
Yeah.
Yes, those are the ones that were intervened and they're within the service boundary like I just described.
Okay, is that the one we just gave approval, say, a couple?
Yes.
After meetings back?
Yes.
Okay.
And by the way, that one property owner, they own 2 parcels.
On this, I still don't have a straight answer. Within, that doesn't require district boundaries, okay? We're on the basin. Within the district boundary. Landowner allowed to grow above.
Under your policy from 2002, the answer is no. But you've given an exception recently I agreed to that one, so you can waive your own rule, that's allowed. And then in addition, you adopted this rule 10D here within the last, what was it, a couple of years ago?
At the same time.
Oh, was it the exact same
Same
time?
meeting.
Where you kind of, you changed the rule a little bit by saying, hey, if you're you applied that if you're farther than 660 feet from a high desert water district boundary, water line, even if you're within the boundaries of the district, but you're farther than 660 feet, you can go ahead and drill your own well. That's the implication of it. Because what it said was, if you're closer than 660 feet, you can't drill that well or you can't pump it because you've got to tie into us. So by implication, that also means if you're farther than 660, we're giving you a pass on that and go ahead. If you know what that is.
I remember that meeting, I was completely.
What I think is really interesting is that as well in our terminology, I think if I go back a few minutes here, I think drilling a well is something we don't have the ability to have anything to do. Pumping a well is, and so Scott, I think there's a little bit of a difference. I'm very cautious of the words we're using. So we can't prevent somebody from drilling a well. Understanding, but we can prevent them from pumping. And if the county can give them a right to drill a well, that doesn't give them the right to pump it.
I don't think that anybody will drill a well.
You're absolutely right. Why would you spend $100,000 drilling a well if you can't pump it? That's the practicality. But I think Director Satan's point is well taken. You need to have the county be on the 100% the same page with us. And Rhonda has done a great job having that person, that connection. But it's not county policy. It's the staff members working out a practical thing here so that we get the information we need. But really, it should be county policy that any well drilled within the Warden Valley Basin must follow these standards and this, that, and the other. And the county supervisor should fully endorse that, especially if they live here. That's our hope.
And again, Scott, Director McCone, I'm sorry. The reason we're here is because of these equities, these ambiguities. And what I want to also include is, again, we want to make some considerations and recommendations at the end. One of those will be, can we consider amending Rule 102 to allow service boundary with conditions, one of which might be outside of 660 feet of a water line, somewhere where they're not eligible. That's where we're trying to get to. And you may choose to allow it, and you may choose not to, but the fact is that we've allowed a variance at this point. And the way the Watermaster approves wells is by not opposing it. They don't necessarily give approval, there's no application. We just choose to not appear in court and oppose it.
And then, I'll wait, just so go back to some understanding. The time we built a house in San Bernardino County, before they give you a permit, you had a apartment under. And also there was a time they said you had to have. So you think if it's simple enough, where somebody drills a well, San Bernardino County would say, you know, if they're made aware, you have to get a approval or a will serve waiver. Watermaster prior to us issuing a permit. On the route.
100% agree, but the county has to agree to that. They have to say that's what we're going to do, and they have to adopt or modify their ordinance or whatever they have in place, and write that down on a piece of paper and have the supervisors vote on it. And that's what we've never had.
And I've gotten supervisors to say that they will enforce my request, then they get promoted or something. I don't know where they go. But
Right, so again, and we've kind of gone over this already just by jumping ahead here a little bit, but we tried to break this down into which of your policies apply to which kind of circumstance. So in the underline here in the heading, it says pumpers outside the high desert water district boundaries, but within Warren Valley. So all those areas outside your district, you've got this policy that allows them to intervene in the judgment and then to pump less than 1 acre foot as long as they stay within that 1 acre foot and pay their state water project fees, they're good. If they go over 1 acre foot, that's not allowed, and you could stop them from pumping henceforward. You could charge them a penalty, you could do whatever you want. But again, those are the folks outside of the high desert water district service area. That's your current policy, 0102.
Do we need to get permission from them to, have our people check the meter and make sure that the meter is still serviceable and working, and, you know, they can't just say, oh yeah, we pumped less than 1 acre foot, and how do we verify that?
So currently they have cooperated with us, and we have recommended that they install one of our AMR meters so that we can remote read it. There has been some issues, because it's so close to the wellhead, it's getting gunked up with oil or some other component that's gunking up the meter, so it's not working, so we've had to go out and replace those. The reality is 1 acre foot of water, if they're pumping that, we're probably gonna see a little oasis pop up or a lake or something, so I get it that it's the responsible thing. I don't think it's reasonable to think that anyone's really pumping that unless they're just recharging their own lake or something. But it is something that we're watching, and it is an issue that we need a solution for, because they may not all cooperate, and that's going to be some of the considerations that we bring up in a minute as far as what if they have a meter, what if they don't, what can we do?
I know I've heard a number, a whole bunch of times. The average home in Yucca Valley is how much an acre foot?
Well, I'll put it this way, I think the average home uses about 10 units a month. That's about a reasonable thing. I think I probably use more. I have a lot of people coming in and out, but, so 12 months a year, 120, that's 748 times 120. It's about 4 households. Is that right?
I think we're averaging just over 0.26 per household.
That's by the point.
Times 748 times 12.
So your question is?
That's about 9,000 gallons a
So the
year.
average home is using a quarter of an acre foot a year.
Yeah.
I use 90,000 gallons.
Wow. Well, you live in Washington.
the average home uses a quarter of an acre foot. So the reality is that a home is gonna use a whole acre foot.
That's what I think.
You're gonna see,
I think we're gonna see an 08. I mean, unless it's just perking back in the ground, wastefully.
Ron, want to take this slide, because, you.
Okay,
those numbers.
if I can, remind myself what's going on here. So, common knowledge tells us that, and this isn't on record or anything, this is just from our people being out there, there's about 14 private wells within the district boundary that weren't part of the judgment. Since 2002, it's been the Watermaster's general policy to allow mineral producers if they intervene. We've been over all of this. And a minimum at least 14 of these, we need to get them to intervene and be part of the process, but we need to consider what are the terms going to be in order to do that. And then one of the questions that comes up is the existing. So if you go previous to the judgment, it's pretty obvious that there was a number of wells that existed that didn't claim self-help, that didn't come in and say, hey, I'm using the water, I want to be listed. So we have to consider if we want to treat them a little bit differently or not. Again, these are all things that we've already discussed throughout the presentation.
I can break it down a little bit more. So if you've got 14 wells pumping out there, within the high desert watershed boundaries, you don't know for certain that happened before or after this policy adopted in 2002. Because if it was after 2002, they should be paying, they should be intervening, they should be all that stuff. But even if it was before 2002, they have to intervene to be part of the judgment so we can keep track of them. Whether we charge them or not, that'll be up to the board to decide. They still need to be named in the judgment so that you as a board and the judge knows exactly who those people are. Because the judge has complete jurisdiction over your groundwater basin. That just doesn't belong willy-nilly anymore. That is subject to a judgment that the judge controls through you guys. If that makes sense. So having a wildcat, you can't really get away with that anymore. There's just too many of them, and 14 is not a monster number, but there's more people moving in and out, and it could get.
that's 14 that we know of.
That we really know of, and I'm going to get into a little bit later some speculation with a different number, just based on developed properties. I had a thought here. So the one word that comes up a lot, and I want to make it clear that there is nothing written down anywhere that establishes conditions for this word. But this is the word that comes up a lot, and I want to refer to this when we talk about wells that existed before the judgment that somehow didn't get included. And the word grandfathering comes up. Well, shouldn't they be grandfathered? So that may be true, that they should or shouldn't. I can't say, that's for you folks to decide, but that's the word that keeps popping up, that hey, that's a grandfather thing. But again, I want to emphasize, there is no policy written down anywhere in the Watermaster rules and regulations that allow for grandfathering. And we could establish one, if you would like, that would be a consideration and maybe a recommendation, but at this time, there's no such thing.
They would not have, someone that had a well prior to the adjudication, chose not to get involved in the adjudication, has had this well sort of on their own cognizance for all this time, and now that they're getting pressure to sign up and join up, now they want to say, hey, we should be grandfathered. And we don't want to pay that because we were here way back when.
Potentially.
But that is not legally binding. It's an option for the Watermaster to say yea or nay to establish a policy, and grandfathering isn't legally binding and required.
Today, no, it's not, but the way that you've always worked it here is that any policy or rule that this board adopts, we take it to the judge so the judge blesses it. And the judge has the authority to change the judgment. And so if this board were to direct that, hey, we're going to grandfather in this class of people, not that class of people, you vote on it, and then not today by any means. And we take it to the judge and explain to the judge why it's a fair deal, and the judge would bless it, and then it would be the law of the land.
I'm not proposing grandfathering. In fact, I thought I was coming up with a rationale to oppose grandfathering.
Either way you want to do it. I mean, one thing that I haven't shared today, because I haven't wanted to be too firm, but any pumping that's done beyond what the judgment allows and what your policy allows, because the judge approved that policy, is illegal. It can be enjoined. I can go to court tomorrow and have the judge shut all that down. That's not what we would recommend as a staff. And there's obviously a lot of state water being pumped that can't be paid for, even if it hasn't to date. But legally speaking, there shouldn't be any pumping out of this basin. It isn't tracked, and everybody knows what's going on, and everything's transparent, and everybody knows about. And so, if you really wanted to get firm with it, again, I don't think Ron wants to suggest that, but you could tell Steve to go to court tomorrow and start shutting down people who aren't complying, if you really wanted to. Not sure that's going to gain a lot, make anything any better, though, you know what I mean? So
I think grandfather is kind of an interesting concept. It's like people that did originally join the state water project all of a sudden say, well, yeah, we actually do want to join the state water project. Or the thing we're having right now, there's some people that have opted not to become part of the Delta fix. And all of a sudden, a few years from now, they go, well, yeah, we were there, so let's grandfather us in and let us be part of the Delta fix. So that's one of the challenges for me that I struggle with the grandfather is, you know, I didn't do my due diligence in 1977, or my grandfather didn't do due diligence in 1977, and now I want to have that.
So I'd like to, real quick, just to,
Oh,
I'm sorry,
Roger.
go ahead. So I would just like to weigh in there a little bit, just as a citizen or a staff member. I have to think back to 1977 or the 1970s. And one thing you gotta remember, this in the town was owned by Ted Gerlin, not HCWD, right? So we weren't necessarily privy to all the homeowners over here. A lot of the homeowners that we're gonna talk about here in a minute that are in what I wanna call like the unofficial fringe areas, I suppose, and I'm just speculating here, didn't really live here. They probably lived somewhere else, came here on the weekends maybe on the summers, I don't know. I'm just not confident that there was sufficient outreach to make sure all these individuals even knew this stuff was going on. And I know it was a subject at the time, it was in the newspapers, on the radio, and we were having council meetings and water board meetings about it. But I don't suppose that all these remote property owners actually maybe knew what was going on for those reasons I mentioned. One of them was the majority of them are on the west end of town, which would have been Gerling's, Yucca Water Unlimited, and then another chunk of them aren't within either water district boundary, neither Yucca Limited or either water district. And it's awfully coincidental to me that not one of the property owners that are outside those service boundaries, not one came forward and intervened. Not even one of them. So, is that a coincidence? I don't know. Did they all band together and rebel? I don't know. But the policy that I'm advocating for here is that we come up with some reasonable solutions to convince everyone to cooperate so that we can get a list and manage them responsibly. I personally would just give it to them free. That's not my call. Just to get them to cooperate. You alluded to it a minute ago, President Huff, that you were inquiring about water rights somewhere else. Well, all of these people, they got my phone number, the ones that are trying to find out. So I'm dealing with these questions weekly, if not daily, trying to come to these conclusions and trying to administer it fairly. So it's really important to me that we come to some conclusions that we can move forward with so that I can administer it equally. That's the important thing for me here. How's that? I'm
activity that's going on. There's no consistency in the county. There's no consistency passing down the regulation. There isn't any regulation in many cases. Found out today that the church owns a third of a well, right, potential of water, and it's like, we're hooked up to the town. But you think about how many of these other situations are just like that. We're not helping ourselves unless we really think through this process and come down to some concrete things. Realistic, so you have a policy. You're having to stumble around in a whole lot of different things.
Right, exactly. Thank you. Moving on to the next slide. This is, I'll touch on this. So this is Rule 10B, which you can find in the rules and regs, not included in the 01-02 policy that allows new wells. And this was a provision that was made back in March of 2021 that I described earlier that would suggest that if you were not eligible for water in the district service boundaries and you drill a well, that once water was available within 100 feet, that you would be required to connect to the public water system and that you would stop pumping and abandon that well. This is something, again, we want to make a recommendation or consider amending or taking care of this rule by amending the other rule of 2002.
So we only have 2 more slides before we have a little break, and then we get to the recommendations after that. So I just wanted to make sure the board president understood that in case you want to take public comment now or later. But again, this was the rule. And then the last slide we have before we have 6 or 8 slides of potential recommendations is we talked about this deal about intervening. And to date, the way you intervene is you go down to the courthouse, usually with a lawyer, and you ask to intervene in the case. And there's a standard form. And per this board's direction 3 or 4 years ago, we at my office put together a standard form where somebody can go try to fill it out themselves or hire a lawyer to fill out the forms and then take them down to the San Bernardino County Superior Court and fill those out and try to intervene in our case so we can keep track of them. And you know, I'm softening my stance a little bit that we'll talk about later, but originally what I told your group and your staff was, hey, I can't represent them going to court and intervening because I represent you guys. I can't be representing everybody because there's a conflict of interest there between them and us. And so I don't really, I'll prepare some draft paperwork and they can fill in the blanks and then they kind of, but at some point they got to take the baton and do it themselves because I can't do it for them. But anyway, this is how you do it. You just fill out some paperwork at the court and the court blesses your entry into the case, and then we know who you are, we know where your well is, we know what your property is, we know your APNs, and we let you go. And for those in the last particularly 3 or 4 or 5 years who come to intervene and gone through the process, the court has never said no to letting them intervene. Of course the court wants to know who they are and most of them don't. You know, it's one of those whirling doors, come on in, we're glad to have you. But there is process. Just because it's legal stuff, you got to fill out some paperwork and set a hearing and go through all that stuff. It's just the way it is. So.
Does the intervention give the Watermaster or the Watermaster's high desert water district employees the right to annual inspection of the well and meter?
I would have to reread it. I don't know if it specifies the inspection. I do believe it allows us access, and it certainly provides that it's metered. I'd have to go back and review the specific details.
Yeah, it's sort of, a lot of judgments say you can, but the truth is we live under a constitutional democracy where we have the 4th Amendment right not to be searched and seized at our own property. And so even if judgments say that, the truth is, without a warrant, you can't go on someone's property without their permission. And so no matter what we write down on a piece of paper here, you really can't hold them to it. And for us to say, hey, we'll support your intervention as long as you let us on your property, we've never wanted to do that because we want them to intervene. We don't want to give them a reason not to intervene. And so we've never gone that far, to be quite honest. And it'd be hard-pressed for a judge to sign. If we were to say, hey, judge, we want them to guarantee that we can get on their property whenever we want, judge is unlikely to sign that. Judges understand the constitutional rights of the individual citizens, and We got this.
Well, on this slide here, proper wishing to file intervention in opposition to the Watermaster. I think we could look, as we move forward, instead of having the word non-opposition, that we actually have something, a statement of acceptance or, something that this did come to us, and it did come through this. What you say? Support, instead of non-opposition, which is kind of,
Even
like
though
we didn't pay attention.
As far as the court's concerned, and it's set up legally, it is non-intervention, but for the lay public, it's basically support.
Sure, and we can do that. That was a little too legal probably, to say that, just because of the legal context, but there's no problem with us just saying support. And we have some other recommendations that we think will make it even easier for folks to intervene coming up after. Right, this is the last slide. Yeah, this is the last slide, and we have another 5 or 6 slides with recommendations, but I didn't know, President Hussle, how you want to handle them.
Well, I think what I'd like to do is, yes, I'd like to go ahead and have public comment. Mr. Hussle, could you go ahead and go to the microphone? Sure. And to, I'll take that one. As a follow-up to Director Stevens.
To the follow-up to Director Stevens, he was asking if a well that is already in existence follows all the laws and everything. The holes come out, whatever is said. I want to drill a new well. What is the requirement? May I drill a new well without having to? Didn't really understand the answer. Can I develop a new well? I've run it through development. I've done everything. It's no good. I want to drill a new one.
I'd like to give council to answer that briefly.
Okay, and I'm taking my cue from President Huff earlier. We have to be careful with the words. Your right to drill a well is about the county. It has nothing to do with us. Well, what the Watermaster controls is your right to pump it after you drill it. So whether or not you have a right to re-drill a well is entirely down to the county office in San Bernardino. It's got nothing to do with us. Whether or not you have a right to pump that well depends upon which category you fall into and what this Watermaster is going to decide on all these recommendations we have today. And it's not just, we have 5 or 6 recommendations today, but there's probably 10 more that we need in the future from you. We just didn't want to overwhelm you. So it depends on what category you fall into, right?
Correct. So the county is responsible for the permit to drill. So in order to pump it, I need a permit from.
We need to determine what category you're in.
So what's going to happen is if, when you apply for a permit with the county, currently there's a person there that's going to call me, and she's going to say, Ron, is this property subject to the Watermaster rules and regs? And then I'm going to decide whether it is or it isn't, and based on that, they're either going to give a permit or they're not. If you are currently listed as a minimal producer, and I advise them of that, they're going to go ahead and give you that permit, and you can drill your new well because you're still eligible for that 1 acre foot of water. If you're not, then you would be subject to the 0102 rule that allows you to intervene and then be subject to those rules. And that would be possible.
One follow-up question. If I purchase a piece of property that has a well, everything is legal, all the way down the line. If I was wrong.
Thank you. Okay, what I'd like to do,
We have several online, and we did receive some via the chat. So if I can go ahead and have those public comments done at this time as well?
I didn't see that.
Okay. As far as online, we had several that asked, is a list of the parcels able to be provided to several that have asked online?
So the list of the parcels that are.
Would it be okay with the board if some of these questions are answered? Okay, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. In the board packet for today's meeting is a copy of the judgment. And Exhibit B to the judgment, which is page 48 of the board packet, has the 16 has the 16 minimal producers and their APMs, and it also lists Blue Sky, so it's right there in your board packet.
And the thing to notice there is the parcel numbers, the owners may have changed.
I do believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but this being a workshop, we're able to answer and... Okay. Let's see. Are you planning on hiking up to the properties to offer Yakko water?
This would be a notion of the neighborhood getting together and agreeing on an assessment district and providing a mechanism for the water district to develop its neighborhoods. It is not a practice under the water district at this time to develop with water service undeveloped neighborhoods. Tony can elaborate, maybe. No? Okay.
And it looks like I have another one that asks, who took the water district to court in 1977?
So in 1976 and 77, a group of landowners and the High Desert County Water District, as this district used to be called then, and the Yucca Water Company, all those folks got together and they agreed how to split up the water. And so they marched into court hand in hand and asked the judge to bless the deal that they had reached. And on the paperwork, High Desert Water District is listed as the plaintiff, but because this was a stipulated judgment, they just listed High Desert Water District as the plaintiff because they raised their hand first and said they want to be the plaintiff. If that makes sense.
Another one just came in. I understand the water district be concerned with in the bounds of your jurisdiction, but I do not understand why you want to get involved with homes that you do not offer water to. If you offer water or pipe to those houses, then I think it may be your business.
So this is not the High Desert Water District's Board of Directors. This is the Watermaster that was appointed by the court as the managers of the Warren Valley adjudicated basin.
That's exactly right. So the court has appointed this board to manage the groundwater basin as shown in the black lines of the Warren Valley adjudicated basin. This board, when it sits here today, is in charge of administering the judgment, whether it's within or outside of the High Desert Water District boundaries. It's all about the black line.
And concluding with the questions that were put in the chat section, is there anybody online that would like to unmute themselves and have public comment or question at this time?
Before you go to the recommendations, and let's bring it back to the board if there's any questions.
You say that when somebody wants to drill a well, they come by San Bernardino County to do something?
Yes, currently.
Okay.
Currently, I have a contact in there, as I mentioned earlier, and she's been there quite a while, and she's been very, and one of her coworkers responds to me also and keeps me informed. However, they get promoted occasionally and they go away.
Okay, so this is a hit and miss.
Yes, we do, however, get a weekly subscription from the county that includes all permits issued. So we do have the opportunity to monitor that, and look out, but that's for the whole county. We're seeing permits for the whole county, so we have to kind of fish through those and see which ones are in our jurisdiction. And then at that point, the permit's already been issued. And currently, they are cooperating with me and providing, that's a redundant, putting a provision on the permit that says they are subject to the Warren Valley Master Rules and Regulations. Warren Valley Watermaster Rules and Regulations. So that's on the county permit currently with the personnel that are issuing them. my hope that we can come to some mechanism, maybe through Don Rowe or some other party, that we have a MOU, a formalized MOU of some sort that passes not only with the county but through our staff. Because these things get handed from person to person in our staff, and sometimes there's not an opportunity to hand them off. Did it really get handed to me so much as the phone just started coming to my desk? And I said, oh, well, what are the rules? And started trying to understand what they were.
Ready, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. President. So, broken this down into, I think, 7 or so subject areas. Intervention. So we've talked about the intervention process, but what we've heard from, particularly in the last number of years, is, gee, that cost me a lot of money to hire a lawyer to go intervene, and that sounds like a lot of work, and gee, I can't even find a lawyer. Go ahead.
And originally, when the rule allowing new wells was written and adopted, the provision for cost and the paperwork actually said that the property owner will be responsible for paying costs associated with intervention, but the paperwork would be filed by Watermaster's legal counsel. One of the first interventions that we didn't oppose, the rule was amended to say that the paperwork would be filed by the property owner, not Watermaster legal counsel.
So over time, you've taken a stricter stance on that and had them spend money. I think I can probably convince the judge, and this is what this recommendation is all about, to maybe on a once-a-year basis or so for me to go in on behalf of the Watermaster and say, Judge, we'd like these 5 property owners to be brought in. They've signed this stipulation that says they're willing to be brought in. I'll let those property owners decide whether or not they want to have their own lawyer, but if they don't want to have their own lawyer, that's their choice, and I'll just kind of do it all for them. It's not that difficult. As I said, it's a little bit of a conflict of interest. I might have them sign a little piece of paper with me to say, hey, just so you know, property owner, Steve is not representing you, but nevertheless, here's the point of this exercise. The Watermaster will go in and do this for you. Obviously, that's up to you. It'll cost you folks a little bit of money on the Watermaster bill for me to do that. But frankly, I mean, our experience is it's kind of worth it. We need to get these cats. It might be worth spending a few $100s to get more every year as we can to get more people on the payroll and get them in the right on the piece of paper rather than just be out there wildcatting.
How would that affect, and my not really understanding, how would that affect 218 if other people, it's not us paying you, it's the community paying you, how would that affect properties at 218? I don't really, my budget pays for some, I don't want to pay for legal services that they should be having to pay for. I don't want to pay, if I get a new house, I don't really think I should have to pay, if I have some legal services that are due, then I should take care of those. I shouldn't have the community helping me.
Right. Well, I don't know if you can call this good news, but under Prop 218, courts are not subject to Prop 218. And you, when you sit here today, are acting as an arm of the court. There is no Prop 218 for the Watermaster bill. Now, truth be told, that passes through the High Desert Water District and gets funneled on down the line to your customers, but as a strictly legal matter, no Prop 218 because you're sitting here in the court.
There's customer service considerations to be evaluated, and there's also the benefits to the Watermaster and to the district for doing. I think that there is some justification for considering and in fact adopting this. Are we going to take these, is this the first point? We're going to take yea or nay on each of them one at a time?
I think we're going to come back at it when I get a chance.
Either way you want to do it. We're trying to throw these out there, I think, Ron, and if we can get some direction, that'd be great, and if not, then we'll wait until the next time.
So I think with direction, we will develop the proper resolutions and paperwork to bring back for voting. I don't think we're set up for taking any action in this format. So we would look for direction right. So we would take the direction, we would prepare the necessary documents, come back in a different, maybe special meeting, I don't know if the next one's in July, we can wait until July, and bring those resolutions back for adoption.
Would you like a consensus on
Yes.
this item?
Yes.
So consensus, again, my question wasn't so much that I would oppose this, my question was that I want to make sure that we were moving forward legally, so.
Solid ground.
It's all around. So from my perspective, I would take a consensus that this is, are you getting a consensus? Consensus? Okay, so I think that would be something we could work with.
Okay, we'll write that down. There's also a final bullet on there. Oh, go ahead, please.
Can I make one comment just to clarify? The Watermaster has its own budget and it has nothing to do with the water district. So they're two separate when you're paying the legal fees. It's under the revenue that the Watermaster is receiving from their user tied to the water district.
And if we need to raise a couple extra dollars for the Watermaster, we've got the dentist here, president to help out.
I know everybody's thinking, I know you've thought of all the legal budgets, just in my own mind, if I can get some of these settled, I'd really appreciate that. Thank you, Tom.
The third bullet has a different, slightly different recommendation, which is, the way that your policy works right now is whether you pump 2 gallons or 326,000 gallons, if you're a mineral producer, you pay for the full acre foot, which is $665. And so one of the things that staff and I were thinking about was, well, we'd like to incentivize more people to put a meter on, which costs a little bit of money. And so we could do sort of a swap with them. Hey, if you agree to put a meter on at your own cost, well, then we'll only charge you, then we'll know exactly how much you're pumping and we'll only charge you that proportional amount. So if you pump 100,000 gallons, you'll pay a third of the state water project fee. Because right now, we don't know, and so we just guess on the high end because that's the safe way to do it, protect the ratepayers. So that's something we were hoping to get a little consensus on.
Great idea, tariff approach.
It's important to break that down, that would apply to new wells that are intervening, not necessarily the existing minimal producers, correct?
Correct, that's what we were thinking because, again, the original minimal producers don't have to pay replenishment assessment, so
Different deal.
right.
If we go back to not the original 16, but some of the people in the meantime, could we offer this back to them?
If we establish a grandfather clause that we adopted that provided those caveats, then I suppose we could.
I'm not sure we even have to offer a grandfather clause in there. We could just say those people that wish that are in this between 1977 now that wish to have a meter on their property can become part of this new focus.
Well, if they're responsible for paying nothing now,
It will be, if they intervene, they will be responsible for paying $600.
unless we were to provide a condition where they weren't. So that would be up to you to decide, yes.
We're gonna get to that. Right.
Yes.
And you said, and the example that President Huff gave you was 1977 and later, so I think he was contemplating not the originals, but the sort of in-betweeners. Yeah, I agree with you.
I misunderstood that.
Is that kind of,
Yes, that's the one that we were speaking of, yes.
It might, from an aspect, even, they might be more inclined to want to intervene, again, because they're not going to be hit with a $600 bill, which is a third of that. So that may help with the water meter and the intervention.
But that would mean that we're suggesting that if they don't install a meter, we would just charge them a full acre foot and allow them not to install a meter.
Well, you're telling me that they're not going to be using that. Well, we have to write it so they can't. This is option one, or here's option two. You get to pick an option. You either intervene, you get lower fee with the meter, or we're going to still put a meter on your property and figure out how to read it somehow. I don't know. It's an interesting question.
Yeah, the option that we're proposing, or the consideration that we're putting on the table is that if you cooperate cooperate and you install a meter, we would prorate your acre foot replenishment fee. If you intervene, but you don't want to install a meter, we would charge you the full acre foot replenishment fee. And that would be, we're saying we're allowing that.
Okay. If you're talking about paying any fee right now,
There are only two individuals, which I can't imagine they're not listening in, that are paying replenishment fees. They have intervened in the last 5 years, and they're active. There are another 3 that have intervened, but they haven't developed yet, and there's 2 more that have wells, and they haven't equipped or intervened, and they're on my watch list just in case, so that we can get them intervened if they actually equip their wells. 2.
Well, the way I think we're approaching this, we're gonna use the carrot and get as many calves coming towards the carrot as we can, and then if we can't get some, I might be coming back to you in 3 or 4 years, or you give me the timeline and say, here's the bad stuff that you can do to those folks, and you can shut them off, we can go to the court, and we don't wanna go there right now, if that makes sense. So I understand they're not paying, they haven't paid, but eventually, our idea is eventually we'll catch up with them.
3 years. Talk about metering wells. Pretty.
But, and that's why I want to make it clear that we're giving it out if the Watermaster agrees. That we are providing it out, it's just causing them to be subject to the full acre foot replenishment fee. It's also, they're still, have the condition to intervene. We're providing a means for that to be less painful by allowing Watermaster Legal to do the legal footwork. We're just going to ask them to consent.
Talking about 2 issues. One is people just agree to put in a meter.
Right.
So that we can find out exactly how much water is being pumped.
Yeah, we have Watermaster obligations that, we have some responsibility to enforce at some point. I really do like the idea of taking the carrot approach for as much and as long as we possibly can, but they should understand, and we should understand, that at some point, going to court and saying, these people aren't playing ball, aren't cooperating, look at all these other people who are, it's not fair to them, let these people just, play cowboy and, I don't want to play. But still pulling water out of the adjudicated basin.
I have the answer here just to be.
Understood, and this is what it is, but I mean, I think, particularly in the last 10 years, the legislature and the governor are coming down with this groundwater stuff.
Oh, yeah.
We were among the last 2 states in the nation not to regulate groundwater. It was only in 2015. Everybody but us and Texas, which is weird for California because we like to regulate here, and so it's hard to get away with it now. I know people are used to not being regulated, but the tidal wave is upon us now.
That was at least moving forward. If we get and in town, these are the rules.
Thank you very much. So the next slide might be kind of obvious, but Ron feels like we need to do a lot more investigating. We don't have all the answers.
So most of my conclusions come from a survey that was done in, I believe it was September of 2002 it was completed. So most of my conclusions are based on that, and then my knowledge of some of the neighborhoods just from hearing from neighbors. We do have 2 that we described earlier that had wells pre-judgment that did get permits and re-drill, and I became aware of them at that time when the permits came through. And based on that their neighbors, and what seems, obvious that there's some more, property owners out there in the same boat. So, we need to do some more formal surveying, knocking on doors, things of that nature. The consideration here is we don't really have the resources in-house, HDWD, based on whatever the window might be. If we got 3-5 years to do this, we can do a little bit at a time. If we want to get this done in a shorter, the whole triangle, fast and cheap and what have you, we would probably want to bring in a consultant if we wanted to just get this thing done. There's been some ideas bounced around, bringing in a temporary employee. Even some of the property owners' names have been kind of thrown out there. Well, maybe one of these guys might want to do it. Currently, we have another company doing some conservation effort for us that maybe they have someone on their staff that might want to take on the job. But we would look for direction on, at least the time frame, so we can consider what the best process for future research. Get into that caveat of knocking on doors in rural neighborhoods also.
I think that we have an obligation to the court to our due diligence. We can. I don't quite understand all the regulations with drones and all kinds of things, but I'm not sure drones would actually spot these wells. I don't know, or you're knocking on doors saying, well, I don't have anything here, but I would be a consensus of trying to move quickly and follow the court rules as quickly.
How much is within the High Desert Water District boundary and how much is outside High Desert Water District boundary in the?
So right now, based on those previous survey, I believe there's probably 14 within the district boundary, the service boundary. I believe in the Kickapoo neighborhood to the south here, west and to the south, there's around 24 developed properties. They may have hauled water, they may have a well, private well.
Hauled water is no longer legal.
Well, hauled water is still grandfathered. They can't get a building permit with hauled water. So if they already had it, they can continue to use that. So what I'm suggesting is there's at least 24 developed properties. Maybe hauled water, they may have their own well, they may be shared with a neighbor. It's undetermined. That's on the southwest corner here. The Lock and Tenant area, there's about 60 developed properties over there.
On the other side of the wash.
I speculate there's less of those that may have a private well. It's more of the whole water area. And then the other caveat that we're going to get into a little bit here with one of the recommendations is, if you remember, I pointed out how far that adjudicated line goes into Joshua Basin. Well, it picks up a whole developed neighborhood in Joshua Basin. So I suspect they all have services with Joshua Basin, but they're still in our jurisdiction unless we can move that line back a little bit. So 60 or almost 100, neighborhood of 100 that needs some door-to-door correspondence. Now, it was suggested early on that we develop a mailing list and put out some feelers through the mail, see what we get back, and then move forward from there. But we would certainly have to begin somewhere.
Kind of help us there.
Yeah. I have no proposal. We haven't moved that far.
But I think we want to move forward to at least investigate that. Would be correct.
I think it would be safe to say that doing what we need to do is something that we need to do.
Right.
As far as it being an emergency, spending a lot of money up front, it's probably going to be, judgment call as to time versus money. So finding a middle ground, having a staff recommendation expectation of some balance of time versus money to accomplish what needs to be accomplished.
We could get you guys shirts.
Well, we need to consider safety, employee safety also, because like Ron says, we're going into neighborhoods we don't know. And we don't know.
Never happened to Fred.
I know, that's the thing, is we definitely need to, that should be our biggest priority right there.
The question on the other side is, you know, the court has told us to do this. What happens legally if we're not doing our due diligence?
Well, like anything else, you're in charge, basically, day to day. Obviously, that judge has 10,000 other things they're doing, and so that judge expects you to do it. Theoretically, lots of things could happen. One of the pumpers who's complying with the law can alert the judge and say, hey, your watermaster isn't doing their job, and they're not protecting my rights. I'm one of the people following the rules, and all these 30 other people aren't, and they just let them give them a free pass. That would not look too good for us.
Well, we're not doing that.
We're not
just doing that. So I think we would have some kind of consideration and would be told to speed it up rather than, hey, you guys just totally missed the boat. We're working on it. We're just maybe not working on it quite fast enough. And I'd rather err on the side of caution so we don't spend way more money than we need to, or, as Tony suggests, put any of our employees at undue risk.
That's why I like the outside consulting firm.
Put them.
Well, I think the outside consulting firm would have that logistical knowledge that we don't have. And I have a pink shirt, but we can get that over one.
We could get you guys shirts. We could get you guys
I
shirts.
have one already.
There you go. There's 4 or 5 of you. You could.
Yeah, sure.
So one time I did own a little cabin up in the Walking Center. Have a man up there, widget. He said, if there's any water up here, it's really.
And as I speculated, I doubt that there are so many up there, but I believe there's more hot water, but it is within that jurisdiction, and if we're going to investigate, I think we need to be thorough.
Yeah, that's just.
All right.
On that point?
I think we'll bring that back with an outside consultant.
So we would need to develop a scope of services, I guess, and then get some proposals. So we would need to probably go out, request for proposal or something like that, and get some proposals and see what the ballpark is and consider that.
And then do we have an ongoing process? Because what we do this year won't necessarily cover all the bases 5 or 10 years from now.
So I think that would depend on the MOU, like we talked with the county, and passing it on from staff members and developing that. One of the things that I hope to do is I think President Hubbs mentioned earlier, where we would have a more formal way of non-opposing. So it's occurred to me that maybe we would have some sort of application they fill out, and we would at least have that on record where they apply in written form for us to support.
They would maybe help us with the outside consultant. Your feelers are probably a lot stronger than ours in figuring this.
We can certainly try. Most of the people we recommend are like experts who sit behind the desk. So if you're looking for somebody.
So where
Somebody with, Miracle or Basin or something, I'm not sure. We'll certainly send out feelers. Okay, well, here we are on to the next slide. Hopefully it's not too complex here, but we've got a series of bullets here. To the extent that they're already not there, we'd like to see the Watermaster policies be amended. Number one, we need all these people except the original 16 to intervene in the judgment so we can track them. Their name needs to be on the list. Seems like that should be non-controversial, and the rules are sort of halfway there now, but they're not all the way there. So we'd like to change the wording a little bit, make it crystal clear to everybody that if you're pumping and you weren't one of the original 16, you need to get before the court, and we can help you do that. If the board gives a head nod on us doing that once a year, but you need to get on the list, and we need to change to make that crystal clear. Not necessarily seeking direction today, but if you want to, as a board, consider exempting out, I know we don't like the word grandfather, but more than just the original 16, but others, something you could chew on. If you want to give us a sort of head nod on this today, feel free to do so, but if not, we wouldn't blame you for wanting to take more time. But one of the things staff thought of was, well, if there are people out there that can come forward and prove to us that they were pumping before 1977, and maybe they were absent landowners like Ron was describing before, they just didn't know about the process. Maybe your board wants to consider not charging them a replenishment assessment. Either way, they got to intervene, but maybe you give them an exemption for having to pay the money. We'll leave that to you, but we wanted to float it out before you, whether you want to give that kind of thought to having a whole other category of people beyond the original 16 who get a free pass.
I would suggest that if they did not choose to participate in the original judgment, they're not part of the original judgment, and grandfathering people who didn't participate back then now is just rewarding that behavior.
As I said earlier, I think that, I understand your concerns, they may have been up here and be cowards, but I think one of the things that my world, actually, there's so much legal stuff I have to be aware of. I have to be aware of it, and I don't think not knowing the law is an excuse not to really follow it. I really think, I understand I live in an unbelievable my world in the industry. I'm not really in favor. I would have to concur with the record stating I'm not really in favor of letting them use the term grandfathering. I'm not.
It's not really all that onerous to put they're going to put a meter on anyway, whether grandfathered or not, so it's only the proportionate dollars of how much of the acre foot for replenishment cost that is in question.
And we're going to help financially get the harvest done, so.
So we would, based on the two directors so far, we would treat them as the new wells and subject to that policy exactly the same.
Exactly. That would be my concern.
Reason why I think it's a good idea, because it's all.
What's up, Biggie?
Yeah.
Steve, I have a kind of related question to all this. So I realize that the existing 16 minimal producers, they indicated to have the maximum weight. They also stipulated to not exceed that. So what authority does the Watermaster have to control that when they can't really require a meter? That seems like a bit of a conundrum right there. Is there anything that can be done to monitor that? And I know it's a problem, and it's different from our total water supply, because that meter is on site, and the only place that well is is on site. So it creates an interesting dynamic. I just wonder what you've spoken to it before, but maybe you can.
Sure. Well, first of all, they're not allowed to pump over 1 acre foot regardless. And so if your staff even has a slight suspicion that they do, we can send them a letter and have them prove it up. And if they won't respond to that, we go to court and say, hey, we have this relative proof supported by a declaration from the staff. Says, hey, they got no oasis out there, Judge. It doesn't look like 1 acre foot to us. And they refuse to stand forward, and that judge can issue an order against those folks. They also can't use that acre foot except on those parcels that are listed in the judgment. And so if we find, using these volunteers or these consultants, that somebody's serving a bunch of their neighbors, that's really not allowed. You know, that's not allowed, and if we discover that, we can maybe help them out and figure out a way to help them, but strictly speaking, under the judgment, that's not allowed. You can fine them. Also, if they're going over 1 acre foot, you can certainly penalize them. That's absolutely contrary to the judgment. You can charge them a replenishment fee, and I can go to, and I can, up to 2 times under the existing rules, and I can go to the judge, and the judge can order them to shut down entirely. I mean, again, those are extreme examples, but you don't get to go over the 1 acre foot willy-nilly. There's a reason that it's there. So I don't know if all that answers it, but there are mechanisms to deal with that. There's, thank you. Again, this is kind of leading into what we've got on the third bullet there, which is you can't pump over an acre foot, no matter who you are, whether you're one of the early 16 or after that. Whoever you are, if you're pumping in the valley and you're not, a golf course, an high desert water district, you can't pump over an acre foot. So we've got to have mechanisms in our policies that make sure people understand that. We can charge them penalties and even shut them off if necessary. You do have some of that in your policy today, but it could be expanded. And so I think Ron and I were thinking we would expand that and make that, again, crystal clear to everybody that you can't go over 1 acre foot, and that includes serving the neighbors.
Would this be an entree into encouraging people to get a meter and provide access once a year? Because if you can then prove you're not, you're good. And if you can't, then you're suspicious, and maybe we talk to the judge about you. So it's the stick, potential stick, to get people to cooperate with putting in a meter and providing annual access so we can verify, and then to not. You're not, and you're prorated down by the amount you actually use.
And that certainly works for those coming forward that are in the new rule. The ones that were exempt, there's still no requirement to pay anything. We would be,
But there is a requirement to use less than 1 acre foot. How better to prove that you are in fact using less than 1 acre foot, having a meter and allowing us access on a once a year basis.
right. How do you, is that clear to you?
Yeah, we can write that in. It's sort of a law, it's still a carrot. You have access to verify, otherwise we're gonna assume that you're doing bad things, or doing something.
So the carrot is that we won't be suspicious of you and start watching closer, by enforcing with a stick.
Right.
Okay. So the carrot is we won't use the stick.
Yeah.
There's no other carrot.
We will understand that you have nothing to hide if you show us you have nothing to hide.
All right. Otherwise, we
will expect you might have something to
suspect.
hide. All right. In which case, we may need to talk to the judge about it.
We may need to report you.
Yeah.
Okay.
And Ron, am I wrong? And I don't want to be wrong in this, but I'll take a guess. If you had an APM with a well on it, you can kind of tell whether they have an oasis on their single parcel. You can probably eyeball that. Where I think you're going to find the trouble potentially is people serving their neighbors. It's hard to discern that. Pipes are under the ground, so someone's going to have to figure out why is there a cluster of 5 houses over there that are not high desert water district customers. They're not getting bulk water from anywhere. Somehow they're getting water in their property. Those are the folks that are going to.
Well, I wonder if we could just have the meter readers. Of course, it's all kind of automatic now, but just kind of go around. There's a meter on this house, there's a meter on this house, and there's no meter on this house.
There's some of that we, within these numbers and some of the research we've done, we're aware of some suspects. And we have a informal list of suspects, yes.
Yeah.
And I've tried to tell Ron too, again, as a carrot, that it's really not just a water rights matter for people who are doing that. There's a water quality issue for those folks, right? They're operating potentially a small community water system. They fall within some of the state regs, and maybe they don't know it. They could be individually liable, not well owners, if they're bad water in their neighborhood. So you think that they want to be made aware of that, and they might well receive that information.
That's an excellent point, Steve. Speaking to that point to any new prospective well people, that they really understand the rules, state rules for mineral producers serving water out of their property.
There's a list that you can.
It could be a real liability issue for them.
Yes, I agree.
The last bullet on this, which I think we've already heard from the board on, is either you put on a meter or we're charging you a full acre foot. Your choice. Like we got a head nod on that, if I heard correctly. Yeah. Next slide is Rule 10D, and I know you just adopted it here not too long ago, just went into effect last year about this time. But there's at least a couple of things that we thought the board might want to reconsider. Number one, the last sentence is about well abandonment. That's really a county province, unless we have an MOU, even though it might not make sense in the logic train, the county is the one who gets to decide whether wells should be abandoned. They have an ordinance that requires it, they're supposed to enforce it through their code enforcement officers. It's not really something the Watermaster should do unless we have an MOU with the county where the county says, yeah, we want you, the Watermaster, to enforce that. That's not really our job.
And I would like to include here, this hasn't came up yet, I'm surprised, but part of the HCWD service boundary includes property on the mesa. They're not subject to the Watermaster on the mesa. They're in the Ames Ritchie or in the Copper Mountain, and we have no rule regarding private wells up there. So there are cases up there where they have a water service and a well. In the cases where we know about that, we require them to have a backflow device on their meter, but it's perfectly within the rules to have both. So when we're thinking about this, I like to remember that, hey, in other areas of our jurisdiction, this same scenario is happening, and maybe we could consider that when we're mirroring this.
There's a, Texas that would support the Watermaster having an interest in the decommissioning of wells. A non-decommissioned well could get toxic substances poured down. Wells can work both ways. It's not just pulling the stuff out, but they also use wells to inject water and whatever back in. So I think...
So part of the survey in 2000, I think that was the emphasis, and that was the concern that the ones that were abandoned were properly abandoned. And I think at that point is where we can recommend to the county or to them that they need to abandon them properly.
In such a way to protect the...
Right, and I do believe that's within the Watermaster's jurisdiction to manage that process. We don't maybe make the requirements or issue the law, but the county could be informed.
I think that'd be really powerful because we talked about pollution, but some of you are not old enough to know, but I think in 1980, this little girl got down a well, that I can't think of her name right now, but she was in this improperly abandoned well. She went down a hole and she almost died. She was in there like 36 hours or something. I wish I could think of her name. It was on the news. The whole country was.
That's another, I know what you're talking about, and yeah, that's another consideration, that improperly abandoned well is that kind of a risk.
And they would have found her.
Little kids.
The mother just happened to turn her back for a minute, and they would have never found her. Just by chance they found her, and the kid would be gone.
Right.
So I think that's something like, they don't put latches on our refrigerators anymore. Because when I was a kid, that was a big thing. Kids would get in abandoned refrigerators. And they rule that you have to take the door off, and then they make a rule you can't have a latch on a refrigerator anymore. I think somehow working with the county to make sure that these are properly secured, and the county, or somebody give and I don't know if any of you remember, that was really powerful. I think it went like 3 or 4 days where they were trying to dig a tunnel beside it, collapsed, and it was... Jessica McClure, thank you. 58 hours. Huh? 58 hours. 15 hours, yeah. 58. Not 50. 58. Yeah, 58 hours. 2.5 days. That was, and she was still alive and amazing now. Everybody was watching TV at that time. Anyway, long story, but I think we should do something to make sure these wells are abandoned correctly.
So that's in addition to this recommendation that we will consider ramping up that enforcement. Yes. This Rule 10D, what we would like to recommend or consider is that we amend it. We reconsider the words that we would require them. I think it says here Does it not say destroy here somewhere? Then, I would ask that we consider just requiring them to connect to the water service and not necessarily requiring them to quit pumping or to abandon. As I mentioned, in the county area, outside of Watermaster, we have those conditions where we have a well and a service. So we don't necessarily need to make them get rid of their well that they spent their money on. We just want to require them to connect to the water service as well. And then what we would want to consider here is what the condition would be. Whether it ought to be 100 feet or it ought to be immediately available. The circumstance here is if it's not immediately available, we're causing property owners to put a remote service where they have to run their private service line across someone else's property or through the right-of-way or some other condition. Now, High Desert Water District service rules allow properties to do that on their own accord. This would be requiring them to do that. And I would be reluctant to require someone to trench the private service line across someone else's property. So I would recommend that we make it immediately available, immediately adjacent to the property that they would be required to connect and pay acquisition and have a service installed.
I think we're solid on that. I think I'm only confused is why they want to keep the well and the...
Well, the only argument I can make is they paid a lot of money for it and cost a lot of money, and, you know, people like to have redundancy, emergency provisions, what have you. You know, I don't know, maybe they have a koi pond, but, as long as we've provided reasonable conditions and we're monitoring it, I'm comfortable that they're allowed to maintain that.
Who, you know, I had a well, who regulates what I can bring out of a well? Do they have, the people that are on a well, do they have a treatment plant or something or their well? They restrict that water.
So their permits are through the county, and it's actually the Department of Health and Safety of the county, I believe, is who issues the well permits. So they answer to them with regard to that, the safety of the water quality.
So who checks the safety of the water quality? Does the county go out there now and then?
Their response, I don't know how that works.
Because you see, that becomes an interesting question, because if they have to allow the county on to check the quality of the water, then they don't have, if they have to allow that on, then they have to, would seem to allow us on to check how much they're producing. If they have to allow somebody on.
No, you're making sense. I'm trying to think of, I know that's we're in the county forum. I think you don't you pull your own, grab your own sample, and then you do it yourself, and then you either take it to the lab or the county. So the county usually is never on your property without being invited, is that right?
Yes.
So I understand. That's how they get away with that. Okay. Now, one other thing I want to talk about this rule with the board, just make sure we're 100% on board with what you want, is let's say you have somebody out there who drilled their well after March 1st, 2021, which is the date on there, and then, 10 years from now, the High Desert Water District extends the line, and now you're right there in front of their house, but they've been operating that well for 10 years. The way this is written now is, as soon as that line goes in front, and we have lateral available for them, they gotta pay to connect, they gotta pay the connection fees, and they gotta shut off their well.
Disagree. They don't have to shut off their well.
They can keep the well, but they have to connect, no different than connecting to the sewer. They can keep the well, they can keep the well if they want to, but they have to, my understanding, they can keep their well, what Ron was saying, but they have to connect.
And HCWD has a rule that they would have to provide backflow protection. That means they can't give us that water. We have meter protection that prevents backflow.
I support the idea of requiring anyone within the High Desert Water District service area to connect when the connection is immediately available.
The ambiguous thing here implies that there would ever be water available outside the service boundary. We're never gonna put water out there, so.
Can I, is there an exception for the first 16? The first 16, even if we put a line in front of them, they're grandfathered in, I wouldn't like that word, but if they're listed in the judgment, I don't think we can apply this rule to them, because they're already, right?
They're part of the judgment, and thus would be exempt from that rule, but all other new wells.
Direct comment?
Understood.
Plan to throw a wrench in the motor.
You can.
I can't.
That's why we're here. We're not wrenches.
Give it a try.
So if somebody does pay for a well, project, especially if that well that they put in after March 1st is meters.
I believe the idea here is that not only would we amend Rule 10D, but we're gonna be amending the rule policy 0102 to provide conditions when you would be allowed and when you wouldn't. So if you're currently eligible for service as the system exists, we wouldn't allow the new well, right? So this would ensure that the district benefits from that acquisition and that monetary value that we would have gotten if water was available.
And when you, statistically, what you really have to say is the owners or the customers of the district, remember that.
Plus, at the time we have a water main going through, they have benefits, they have fire flow, they have actually better water quality than they have with their own. Fire flow alone, to me, is gonna, that myself, but.
Making it optional for the few number, I mean, not talking a dozen or so out of 11,000 sections, so it's not a big deal one way or another, and as far as being a good neighbor and,
So this could open up opportunity, depending on the properties. There's a lot of people that, with the influx of building currently, the trending, there are a lot of, parcels that may be subject to this. Now, I haven't counted, but we get questions weekly for people wanting to, develop property and they're not eligible for water, and they're not eligible to drill a well. So this could open that up to be more than just a customer too. Right.
okay, well, my initial reaction was that we're all part of the same water district, all part of the same adjudicated basin. Because that's true, then everybody chipping in their fair share, kind of outweighs the individual benefit to the guy who's already put in the well and doesn't want to pay for water service. But it is better water and more beneficial.
They're beneficial to they're benefiting from the hydrants or the access, like Charlie pointed out.
Right.
Sure.
So what basically happened, Monroe said, we're a community, and the opposite would be that everybody in the area would want to have their own wells and whatnot. If we go to the other extreme, I think that the logic is that we are all in this together, and it makes more sense pulling our weight long term. And maybe years before those lines ever get out there, maybe something we don't even do right away. But yes, the reality is that we want to make sure everybody has or we all think together. Nobody, I got my oar, I'm going to go this way. I got my oar, I'm going to go this way, and then we don't really. Sometimes answers are more philosophical than they are logical or reasonable.
Well, you only paying, well, most it's gonna be an acre foot, $1,000 an acre foot. Or 728 gallons times, now, that regard, abandon the well, because everybody else is paying a lot more for their water than the guy with the well paying even $1,000 bucks.
I don't think we can tell them to abandon the well, but we can tell them that they have to connect when it's they chip in and contribute to the
In that case,
infrastructure for the entire district.
okay, so plant meter, then there's nothing, water, you might still use the.
They're gonna play the
But
fixed
they're paying
cost.
CRP, they're paying.
They're chipping in the fixed cost to help all of us out.
Just a kind of a general perspective that's already been discussed. When you look at everything from a basin standpoint, even the sewage treatment plant and removal of nitrates comes into play here. So somebody who has a well, they have the treatment that's being done through that. So it's difficult to know, to define where the costs begin and end sometimes. In terms of that broad benefit.
Yeah, I think you have a philosophical concept of what is society and what's individual, and none of us would be here really today if those original people in 16 people didn't get together and recognize the power of them as a group instead of continuing to fight over the water rights. And I think that's what we're trying to continue with anything else. Now, purely philosophical decision for those 16 people. If they didn't have to, they could have left it like it was. Or the big one was, I think, if you were around when we bought Journalist District, I mean, how much difference did that make for the human in society? So, yeah, I think sometimes there's just not a reasonable or logical answer to balance, but probably not a really good answer to make.
I have one consideration here, and just to throw on the table, we don't have to come up with a solution right now, but might it be more appropriate that 10B be covered in HCWD policy, and maybe referenced in the Watermaster as we're alluding to a Highland Water District requirement as far as connecting, or not?
I think it should be parallel, you should have a very similar rule adopted by both boards. Because it is partially a high desert water district rule, but the Watermaster is in charge of the well, so there's portions of this rule that sort of apply to both. I just have both adopted. I think what I'm okay with in this rule is that it has a firm date on it. You know, there's this March 1, 2021 date. So this isn't applicable to all those well owners that did whatever they did, Wildcat before then, so that's good. But I also think it's important that we advertise this rule. I mean, it's out there, and everyone's supposed to do due diligence before they buy their house and or buy their lot. But this is a really substantive rule. And so I heard what you folks said. We'll follow that. But I also think it's important people understand this rule. The people who are looking should be able to find this rule and say to themselves, oh yeah, I drilled a well today. Maybe we'll even put it on the approval letter we give them. They need to know about this rule, so they can't claim 10 years from now when we knock on their door, hey, I didn't know about that. Part of the will serve, letter to get a review.
We have to provide a will serve letter, the district does, to potential new homeowners before they can go, like they have to go to the fire department and sign up by the fire department.
So we do that, however, we never issue will serve letters when their primary source of water is a well. It's only when they're eligible for a water service that we provide a will serve letter. And that's an issue that hopefully comes up in the near future with the water board, with HCWD board, regarding will serve letters.
I think we get ourselves another conundrum by not having it. I think we should, during HCWD, they should get a they should get a will serve letter, even if they're gonna put a well in there, as you said, so they know down the road this is gonna happen. Just the same thing as we do with the sewer. We look at Mesquite, they chose not to do that, and now they have, so I think if we kind of told them early on, that's gonna be here. Connect, they didn't want to, they wanted to build their own thing, not be part of the community, and now they are.
Or, in addition, if they don't get a will serve letter for actually connecting and they've got a well, or they're gonna put in a well, then they get 10D and they have to sign
will serve letter and fire flow letters. We don't require them. We provide them.
Yeah.
The county, the building agencies are the ones that require them.
Yes.
So the conversation I'm hearing is somehow we're gonna require them to receive a will serve letter from us, the agency issuing it. I'm not sure I'm following that.
No, the land use authority, and for us, I think it's, well, no, it could be the county, some
Some
counties.
are in the county, some are in the town.
Portion
Yeah,
area.
and they are required to have one.
So either the county or the town, whoever is the land use authority, the applicant is going to for a building permit, those people are the ones that say, the town, or the county, say, have you got your will serve letter, and you got your fire flow letter?
So unless they ask us for one, there's no requirement. No one's asking us to issue it. We can certainly include a clause that, that suggests that they connect to our service, but we can't force that letter on them if they're not requesting it from us. And in the case where they're getting a well, they're not asking us for it.
But tell me that the county is requiring a no-serve letter if they...
They ask,
Okay.
there's been cases where they've asked for those. The interesting part, the caveat there is usually when it's outside of our service boundary, so we have no jurisdiction over that anyway. So I just say, no, we don't do that. That's been coming up with the suit as well. So, but it's almost always outside of our service areas. So it'd be like someone in LA asking me for a will not serve letter for high desert water district water. And I just tell them, no, I'm not doing that.
Where we do provide within our service area, there's a few people that aren't actually gonna get water service because they're gonna have a well, and so they're gonna come to us and say, look, I need a well serve letter, except I don't need a well serve letter because I'm putting in a well. Okay, you've got a permit from the county, you can put in the well, and here's Watermaster's requirement for the well, that we can allow you to have only 1 acre foot, and we'd like to get reporting on that.
We think we need to be only using, comparing the difference between well and pumping. Put in a well, it's the pumping that we control.
Yeah. Right. We have a little bit of flexibility, we have a little bit of insight there because we're the one not opposing it when they go to intervene if it's in our jurisdiction. So we have something to do, but our authority lies with whether they pump or not. And, back to the will serve, I suspect, and I don't know this, that when they're putting in a well for their primary source of water, rather than providing them a will serve letter from a water agency, they're providing them a well permit.
So
That's their source of water that they're providing.
if I can kind of piggyback, I think I'm going in the right direction here, is that if they want to pump, they have to come to us to get an intervening something. So my thought process is when they come here to get the intervention to pump, that they get this amended Rule 10D. Is that making sense?
Yeah.
I think that our nomenclature on those two words is getting a little crossed. I think if we do better, they're gonna have to come to us to get a pumping permit, and when they get the pumping permit, we show them this 10D, that, yeah, you get a pumping permit, but when the water is close to you, then you have to hook up.
The way it's being currently proposed, the way I understand it, is that this is what would happen. They would come to us to, well, the way it's happening currently is they go to the county and request a drilling permit. The county then asks us, hey, is this property subject to the Watermaster rules and regs? If we amend Rule 0102 to allow new wells within HDWD service boundary, then we would provide them the information that they are subject to the Watermaster rules and regs, and they are eligible to have a well and pump from it. The county would then therefore issue the permit with a provision on the permit that says that the permit is conditioned with the provision that the property is subject to the Warren Valley Basin rules and regs. And that's where they become under Rule 10D and Policy 0102. Now, and back to what we said earlier, and Rule 10D will be mirrored in HDWD service policy somehow. So, we do play a part in their permit to drill a well because we're not opposing that permit to be issued.
So we'll change that.
Right, and the other thing that'll happen with this board's permission is if you allow me to intervene on their behalf, then I'm gonna have them sign a couple pieces of paper, right? One of them is a stipulation that they want to intervene, and I can easily add to that stipulation, you agree to be bound by the judgment and all the rules and regulations, including 10D, and here it is, just in case you didn't read it on your own, I'm gonna give it to you. And you're gonna sign on the bottom. That's the cost of us sort of helping them out for relative free. They've gotta officially agree in writing to comply with the rules. Even though they're already subject to the rules, then we're gonna have their John Hancock on that too.
Right.
Okay, good. Almost done here. So this, one about enforcement, we've basically already gone over this. This is our roadmap to using the carrot for a few years to try to get everybody on board and legally compliant, but we'll come back to you in case the stick needs to come out, and you'll make the call whether the stick needs to come out. That's all this really says. So we've got to identify all these bumpers that exist today. We talked about potentially having a consultant to do that, and we'll herd the cats back into the room. And that's sort of the strategy at this point. This one's a limited amendment to the judgment, and maybe, Ron, you want to explain me what's back to that map? You know, from way earlier, would that help explain it? I mean, I think what Ron explained was that part of the adjudicated basin, all the way on the east end, goes beyond what the hydrogeologically DWR has said as part of our basin. And the map's coming up here in a second. And so Ron came up with this idea that I think I can get by the judge if you're on board with it. So go ahead.
Basically, it's hard to see the zooming in when trying to provide these big, large zoom maps. It's hard to see the detail. But if you look on the very east end, and I'll hover my mouse here, this area right here is approximately 2 square miles worth of High Desert Water District service boundary. And I suspect that most of these developed parcels have services with Joshua Basin Water District. So this area,
I think you misspoke.
I think you misspoke.
I'm sorry.
The red line is the High Desert Water District boundary.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
line that you get your mouse on was outside High Desert Water District.
But I said these neighborhoods are in Joshua Basin Water District. Did I say High Desert?
Yeah.
Oh, I meant to say Joshua Basin Water District. So I suspect that they have services with Joshua Basin Water District, which is, it doesn't make a lot of sense that this black line would extend past this yellow line in my mind. Now, the one thing we got to consider here is, now where my mouse is here, where the hand is here, this is the retreat center. So we'd have to be careful. But what I'm proposing is that we consider moving this line back closer to this red line, at least on this eastern side.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I would say, Ron, I need to justify the judge moving that line. I think I could justify moving it to the yellow line. Because then I can say, Judge, this is the real hydrogeologic boundary. We have evidence from DWR and whoever around here wants to sign that.
Yes.
But just going to the red, I'm not sure, that would be harder for me then.
So there is a Pinto Mountain fault line that is, you know where that's at?
Yep.
That would be easily, that's our boundary.
That's kind of a barrier.
Yeah.
There's a barrier, I can definitely use that. So what Ron suggested is we go back to the judge and say, why are we regulating these people in that little 2 square mile area when they're not really in our basin, they're not in the hydrogeologic basin, nothing they do. So that's for this board to consider, whether you want to shrink the judgment
They're
there.
getting service already from Joshua Basin Water District. It's obvious, which basin is which.
That's personal comment.
It might be I don't know, it's right offhand, but there is maps that show.
Gotta be pretty close.
One thing I heard very early in the workshop
Yeah, I'd probably keep them just because they're in sort of this awkward spot, or we could get rid of them, but only if they agree to it. I wouldn't want to take them out without their agreement because they have certain rights under the judgment, but I think what Ron was saying is why don't we pull that black line over a little bit. Why are we regulating folks that are in Joshua Basin's area that are really not, even if there's a well over there, it's not affecting anything in your basin, so why are we in charge of that?
That's really fun of it too. That black line, is that?
So more on the south side, that's a little closer to La Quintana. The red line is La Quintana, pretty much, Yucca Mesa Road, La Quintana. So the southern portion of that is much closer. The northern portion of that north and south black line is probably closer to Sunset, Friendly Hills School. It's just west of Friendly Hills School. It just, certainly bringing it back to the yellow line, if you consider what we talked about earlier about the Yucca barrier and the water being in the zone of transmission, I feel like I can make the argument that we could go all the way to the red line, but I would love to see us at least consider bringing it back to the Warren Valley Basin boundary.
I think the consensus is the yellow line.
Yeah, thumbs up, give it your best shot, and if you can talk, mental physics or Junction Retreat Center into going off on their own and get their buy-in, and, bring it back to the appropriate Yucca barrier line, more or less. Then it represents a real basin, it's not overflowing into the next one.
And that might take a few months we want to get the line pretty exactly right based on geology, because that's what judges are going to bite off on, not just, hey, it'd be convenient for us, hey, that's
right,
exactly. So, okay.
And then if metaphysics won't, then we just make a little bump for them.
Yeah, just be a little bump for them if they want to stay. If I knew that might actually probably stay, I shouldn't say that out loud, but they've got some rights under the judgment, they're pretty good for them.
Yeah.
They might want to stay
They
in.
resisted that for decades, and yet, you're probably right, but I don't know why they didn't realize it as such, and now maybe they will, or maybe they'll be happy to.
Well, they have a pretty nice safety net. They have a really nice safety net from getting our, pipeline water. They may, I don't know, be interesting, I would doubt that they would go away.
Yeah, they talked to me at the last Watermaster meeting about wanting to buy water from us, so they service.
They're outside of our district.
But LAPCO's already said with Joshua Basin's permission that.
That's the function, for the function.
They don't pay anything. Cost of that is good.
I don't think they use more than about 10.
That wouldn't change. They would just still, they just don't pay us anything.
Water is also non-potable. They have a benefit, they have to bring in.
That's really a powerful thing. Again, that's one of the challenges they have. When they have retreat people go, they have to put the signs on, like, don't drink the water, don't drink the water. So, that would be really great, Ron. I think that's the forward.
Thank you. Now, one other piece of the puzzle, but this is one we're going to we go one direction, we'll be years off and maybe never do it, but Ron has also suggested, see how the black line is a little bit yellow to the north, above the retreat center? Well, that means the line was probably misdrawn, and our basin should be a little bigger on the north side. Now, the problem with adding properties to a judgment is that's a whole lot of work. That's expense. We got to serve every single property owner with an amendment to the judgment up there. That's going to be very costly. I can't recommend that today. It could be something to think about in the future, but subtracting is easy, potentially, based on geology. Adding is another world.
What would be the possible benefits of that? Why would be in the future one?
Because you can't control, so if somebody puts a well 12 inches on the other side of that black line and start pumping the heck out of it, even though we all know it's in our basin because of the yellow line, nothing you can do about it.
And then we would like the line.
There's wells there, I believe there's wells there now.
It bothers me, because I was the one that brought up this thing about the Joshua tree, and this is so abstract. It's out there, and it's yellow.
Yeah.
Where do you find the edge of it? We're the court-ordered individuals that are supposed to be ruling over this. What is it? I would like to know what specifics are there, so that there's an edge. I don't care if it's the earthquake fault line or whatever it is. We need to have something concrete.
I don't recall that there's a legal description for that boundary, it's just the depiction.
But if we go to court, I hate to say it, the judge is gonna probably say, well, now we're 40-year camp, give me a line, give me a legal boundary at least for that yellow line that you want me to move it to, so that I know what I'm doing.
The yellow line is supported by DWR.
Yeah, but the judge is still gonna say, well, these lines are so thick, is that a 100-foot wide line? I wanna know where the line is, so give me a street or, right, give me a legal. So I wouldn't be surprised if the judge asked for legal, just so you know.
Maybe an issue for the future, probably expensive,
Or, so back to the eastern line, the other option is to just, look the other way. But I don't.
No, I think the consensus.
We're good on that.
Trying to work this out. I think the consensus is where we'll try to work this out.
All right.
yeah,
Okay. Last page. And this is something we've basically already gone over before, which is the acre-foot replenishment. Because one thing that we talked about was, well, gee, maybe we shouldn't condition the placement of a meter on charging people what they actually pump. We should just estimate it. Say, well, you got 2 fruit trees, and you got a house, and you got 3 people living in there. We'll just pretend like it's half an acre foot, and we'll just charge you half an acre foot. I just wanted to give that option to you. Frankly, I don't think that that's probably a good way to do it. I mean, if you're going to get the benefit of only being charged half an acre foot, you got to prove it up by a meter. The meter tells no lies as long as it's well calibrated, right?
I like it, what we said about that earlier, trying to run with the carrot, because they may not have to pay as much. Families, quarter. Very valuable.
Well, that's all we have, unless you want us to start peppering you with more questions. That's all we have for today. I think that the goal of staff was to the extent necessary, to bring back in writing for your next board meeting or the one thereafter, however long it takes, the necessary changes to the policies and the rules and regulations that would be necessary. Some of the recommendations and the direction you've given us are going to take longer to accomplish, like the consultant. I'm not sure if we could get an estimate by then. Maybe it'll take longer than that. Certainly, however long it takes, but we'll bring these back to you as needed. And just so you're aware, particularly on policies, to the extent this board approves changes to the policies after we've wrapped them all up in a bow, I would then take them back to the judge to bless through a motion. That's all. Got the judge's signature on the bottom there.
Well, you gotta.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, this is a really good example. You look at Tanya, look at Tony, and here you can just see, Ron, the invaluableness of the knowledge and really solving an issue. My appreciation for it.
Right on, good comment, I agree.
I would like to see, probably one of the things that happened with the Watermaster is, as things come up, that we're probably meeting a little bit more often on this, instead of just having our regular required meetings. If you, some of this may be able to drop out a little bit of piecemeal to give us some thoughts, and still in a workshop, pull up the whole thing instead of bringing it back at one time. So I would hope that we may be thinking of our master meetings and that past to kind of discuss this as needed. So, if that is finished.
Mr. President, can I just make one more request? Thank you very much. Just because the public talked before the recommendations were put forward, I didn't know whether there's any member of the public that is wants to make a comment on the recommendations before we close it out. I didn't know.
We could do that. Any public comment? Any more chat?
We didn't receive any in the chat. Is there anybody online that would like to unmute and have public comment at this time? Oh, I think,
Not good if you go to the, we'll give you 3 minutes.
I may be off base here just a little bit. My question kind of went back a little. Can we force someone to have a water meter on their well? Talking about water meters, I know it's been in here, and it may be offset there.
I'm going to give you a brief comment back. I think that the reality is why we wanted to go, I think the reality is why we wanted to go to a care, is it seems like we really can't force them to do that, but by giving them the option, you can pay us an acre foot or whatever it is on the new ones, or we can put a water meter in there and you can pay us half. So I think probably, Steve, you might want to answer that a little bit better than I did.
Yeah, I think as far as the original 16, I don't think we could force them. It's a pretty good argument we could force the people who drilled wells after 1977 to do it, but practically speaking, how do you make them do it? I mean, the only way you could really do it is for me to go and spend a lot of your money, go to the judge, get the judge to sign an order, and then somehow have the order executable by the sheriff. And I mean, you could, but you know, legally, but practically, you're going to spend more money doing that than you're going to save on the back end, and so it also creates a lot of consternation in the community. I'm sure this board would think about, and so can you? Probably. Do you want to? I leave that to you, but that'd be pretty tough.
I think working with the care works real well. Okay.
oh, I'm sorry, but we actually have another one online. Carol, are you online? Can you hear us? Okay, she is chatting, and my comment is regarding the other 14. The gentleman on the panel said that if they didn't show up at the 1977 hearing, that's too bad.
I don't know if we're saying too bad, but I'm just saying that have a due diligence here to yes, we do. So again, Steve, would you?
Sure, and I think it's important. This isn't about one hearing in 1977. The stipulation, the negotiations that led to the stipulated judgment, I have to think those went on for a year or two. I've done some of those. They go on for years and years. So I don't think this was you didn't see the piece of paper, you didn't show up at the court hearing. This is, you didn't participate in any of the meetings that went on for 12 or 18 or 24 months. That's the way these things usually work. I just finished one. We finished one in Borrego. We had everybody show up to those. We had hundreds and hundreds of people showing up to our meetings when the public was made aware of those. So don't just think it was a one meeting thing.